The banker's words cut through the Kansas air like a blade. I ordered an American wife, not some foreign creature who mangles every word. Charles Whitmore's disgust dripped from each syllable as Amelia Kowalski stood frozen on the platform, her single suitcase containing everything she owned, her heart containing dreams now crumbling to dust. In 1876, crossing an ocean for love meant nothing if your voice carried the wrong accent. Dear friends, follow me through this remarkable journey of rejection and redemption, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story of courage has traveled. The train's whistle had barely faded when Amelia Kowalski first glimpsed the man who was supposed to become her husband. Charles Whitmore stood rigid on the Willow Ridge platform, his tailored suit immaculate despite the Kansas dust that coated everything else in this frontier town. His letters had painted him as a gentleman of means, a banker seeking companionship in the vast American plains. Those same letters had promised understanding, patience, and a new beginning. But the man before her bore no resemblance to the gentle soul who had written those words. "You must be Mr. Whitmore," Amelia said, her Polish accent wrapping around each English word like silk around rough stone. She had practiced this greeting 1,000 times during the ocean crossing, whispering it to the stars from the ship's deck, rehearsing it in the cramped quarters below when seasickness kept her awake. Charles's face contorted as if he'd bitten into spoiled meat. "Good God," he muttered, taking a step backward. "Your letters mentioned you were from Poland, but I thought you'd have learned proper English by now." The platform seemed to tilt beneath Amelia's feet. "I speak English, Mr. Whitmore. I study very hard on ship. I read many books." "Books?" Charles laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "You can barely string a sentence together without butchering it. How did you even write those letters?" Heat flooded Amelia's cheeks. "The priest in my village, he helped with words sometimes, but all thoughts were mine. My feelings, they are real, Mr. Whitmore. The woman in letters, she is me." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the spectacle of the well-dressed banker and the foreign woman with her worn traveling dress and desperate eyes. Amelia recognized the looks. Curiosity mixed with disdain, the same expression she'd encountered in New York when she'd asked for directions, in Chicago when she'd tried to buy a train ticket. "The woman in those letters," Charles said, raising his voice as if performing for the assembled townspeople, "could express herself with eloquence and grace." "You sound like you're choking on every word. How am I supposed to introduce you to business associates? To the church congregation? You'd be an embarrassment." Mrs. Henderson, the milliner's wife, tittered behind her gloved hand. Tom Bailey from the general store shook his head knowingly. Even the station master had paused in his duties to witness Amelia's humiliation. "Please, Mr. Whitmore," Amelia said, fighting to keep her voice steady even as tears threatened. "Give me chance. I learn quick. In Poland, I was teacher. I know mathematics, history. I can help with your accounts." "A teacher?" Charles's eyebrows shot up. "You can barely speak, and you claim to have taught others? What did you teach them? How to sound like a peasant?" The words struck Amelia like physical blows. In her village near Krakow, she had been respected, even admired. Parents had entrusted their children's education to her. She had taught them to read and write in Polish, German, and the fundamentals of English. The war had taken that life away. The Prussians had burned the school, scattered the families. America was supposed to be her resurrection. "I am not peasant," Amelia said quietly, her dignity flickering like a candle in wind. "I come from good family. The war take everything, but not my education, not my character." Charles pulled out his pocket watch, examining it as if Amelia were merely an inconvenient delay in his schedule. "Character doesn't mean much if no one can understand what you're saying." "I'm a respected member of this community. I have a reputation to maintain." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small leather purse, tossing it at Amelia's feet. The coins inside clinked with the sound of finality. "There's enough there for a ticket back to New York," he said, "or wherever you want to go, but you won't be coming to my home. The arrangement is terminated." Amelia stared at the purse lying in the dust, pride warred with desperation in her chest. She had spent everything to reach this place, not just money, but hope, courage, the last threads connecting her to the world she'd known. I have nowhere to go, she said, the words barely above a whisper. That's not my concern. Charles had already begun walking away. I advertised for an American bride. Perhaps I wasn't specific enough. I meant someone who could at least sound American. The crowd began to disperse. Their entertainment concluded. Some shot Amelia pitying looks. Others seemed satisfied by the outcome, as if her rejection confirmed some deeply held belief about the proper order of things. Mrs. Henderson paused near Amelia, her voice honeyed with false sympathy. Perhaps you should have stayed where you belonged, dear. America isn't for everyone. The station master cleared his throat. Miss, you can't stay on the platform. There's a boarding house on Oak Street, Mrs. Grundy's place. She might have a room. Amelia nodded numbly, bending to pick up the purse. The coins felt like 30 pieces of silver in her palm. She had sold everything, her mother's silver candlesticks, her father's watch, the small plot of land that had been in her family for generations, to purchase passage to this new world. The letter-order bride agency had taken their fee, the ship had taken its fare, and now she stood in a place where her voice itself was considered a deficiency. She dragged her suitcase down Main Street, each step weighted with exhaustion from the journey and the fresh wound of rejection. Willow Ridge spread before her, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to huddle together against the endless prairie beyond. The general store, the bank where Charles conducted his business, a church with a modest steeple, the hotel with its false front trying to appear grander than it was. At Mrs. Grundy's boarding house, a narrow structure squeezed between the barber shop and a saloon, Amelia climbed the steps to the porch. The door opened before she could knock. Mrs. Grundy was a thin woman with sharp features and eyes that had already assessed Amelia's worth before she spoke. You're the foreign girl Whitmore was supposed to marry. News traveled fast in Willow Ridge. I need room, please, Amelia said, trying to smooth the edges of her accent. I can pay. Mrs. Grundy's laugh was dry as August grass. Can you now? How long do you think that purse of coins will last? Room and board is $2 a week, paid in advance. No visitors, no cooking in the rooms, no washing hanging from the windows. Amelia counted out the coins, her heart sinking as she realized Charles's generosity would barely cover 2 weeks' accommodation. Mrs. Grundy led her up narrow stairs that creaked with every step, to a room barely larger than a closet. A narrow bed with a thin mattress, a washstand with a chipped basin, a small window that looked out onto the alley where garbage accumulated. Supper's at 6, Mrs. Grundy said. Don't be late, or you don't eat. Alone, Amelia sat on the edge of the bed, which groaned under even her slight weight. She opened her suitcase, looking at its meager contents, 2 dresses, worn but clean, her mother's prayer book, a small wooden box containing her teaching certificates, now useless papers in a language no one here could read. A photograph of her parents, taken before the war, changed everything. She picked up the photograph, studying their faces. Her father, a schoolmaster himself, proud and dignified in his best coat. Her mother, whose voice had sung her to sleep with lullabies that now echoed in Amelia's memories like ghosts. I try, Mama, she whispered in Polish. I try to be brave, like you say. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny, lost souls. Somewhere in the building, she could hear other boarders, footsteps, muffled conversation, a door slamming. Life continuing around her while she sat suspended in this moment of failure. She thought of the letters she had exchanged with Charles, how his words had painted a picture of companionship and mutual respect. He had seemed charmed by her descriptions of Polish customs, had claimed to admire her courage in seeking a new life. Had it all been lies? Or had he simply imagined her voice differently, constructed an ideal that no real woman could match? The supper bell rang, sharp and demanding. Amelia washed her face, pinned her hair more securely, and descended to the dining room. The other boarders were already seated around a long table, traveling salesmen, a few unmarried laborers, an elderly woman who stared vacantly at her plate. Conversation stopped when Amelia entered. Well, well, one of the salesmen said, a man with slicked hair and a mustache that looked like it required considerable maintenance. You're the Polish girl. Heard about what happened at the station. Amelia took the only empty seat at the far end of the table. Don't mind if I ask, the salesman continued, but why'd you come all this way for a man you'd never met? Seems risky for a lady. Mr. Dobson, Mrs. Grundy said sharply. Miss Kowalski is a paying guest. She deserves the same courtesy as anyone else. But the damage was done. Throughout the meal, a thin stew that was mostly potatoes and grease, Amelia felt their eyes on her. When she asked quietly for the salt to be passed, she heard someone mimic her accent under their breath. When she thanked Mrs. Grundy for the meal, another boarder snickered. That night, lying in the narrow bed, Amelia stared at the water stains on the ceiling and tried to plan her next move. She could use Charles's money to return to New York, but then what? She knew no one there. The Polish community in Chicago might take her in, but she had no money to reach them after purchasing a ticket to New York. She could stay in Willow Ridge, try to find work. Her teaching credentials meant nothing here, but surely there was something, cleaning, sewing, anything to earn enough to move on to somewhere better. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of home. The schoolhouse where she had taught, sunlight streaming through windows that looked out on fields of wheat, children's voices reciting their lessons, their trust in her absolute. Her mother's kitchen, warm with the smell of bread baking. All of it gone, burned or scattered by war, existing now only in the country of memory. The next morning, Amelia dressed in her better dress, still plain by American standards, but clean and pressed. She would begin her search for work at the general store. Surely Tom Bailey needed help with inventory or cleaning. The store was busy when she entered, several women examining bolts of fabric while Bailey attended to a farmer purchasing supplies. Amelia waited patiently, studying the well-stocked shelves, the orderly arrangement of goods. When the other customers had departed, she approached the counter. Mr. Bailey, I look for work. I am good with numbers, can help with books. Bailey held up his hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Miss Kowalski, I heard about your situation, and I sympathize truly, but I can't have someone working here who customers can't understand. Half my business is taking orders, helping folks find what they need. Your accent, well, it would be a problem. I can stock shelves, Amelia persisted. Clean, organize inventory, work that needs no talking. I'm sorry, Bailey said, though he didn't look particularly sorry. It wouldn't be appropriate. A young woman like you, unmarried, working alongside men. People would talk. People were already talking, Amelia thought bitterly, but she kept her expression neutral. Thank you for time, she said, leaving before he could see the frustration in her eyes. The hotel was her next stop. Surely they needed chambermaids, someone to wash linens. The manager, Mr. Hartwell, barely let her finish her inquiry. We cater to a respectable clientele, he said, his tone suggesting Amelia was anything but respectable. Traveling businessmen, occasional dignitaries passing through. They expect a certain standard. Your presence would be unsettling. Unsettling? Amelia repeated, the word tasting bitter. Foreign, Hartwell clarified, as if this explained everything. We're trying to build a modern American town here. You understand. She understood perfectly. Her foreignness was a stain that no amount of hard work or good character could wash away. The laundry was run by a German woman, Mrs. Schultz, and for a moment Amelia felt hope. Surely another immigrant would understand. But Mrs. Schultz had been in America for 20 years. Her accent faded to barely a trace. I worked hard to become American, Mrs. Schultz said, her arms crossed over her ample bosom. I don't want people thinking my establishment is some kind of immigrant refuge. It's bad for business. By noon, Amelia had been rejected by every establishment on Main Street. Even the saloon, when she desperately inquired about washing dishes, turned her away, though the proprietor's rejection came with a leer that made her glad for the refusal. She found herself at the edge of town where Main Street dissolved into prairie. The wind moved through the grass in waves, an ocean of green and gold stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, scattered across this vast land, were others like her, immigrants trying to plant new roots in soil that seemed determined to reject them. A movement caught her eye. Down the dusty road that led out of town, a wagon was approaching at dangerous speed. The horses were running wild, their eyes rolling white with fear. The driver had lost the reins and was clinging to the seat, shouting commands the horses ignored. Without thinking, Amelia ran toward the road. Her grandfather had raised horses, had taught her their language when she was barely tall enough to reach their necks. She planted herself in the path, arms spread wide, and began to speak in Polish, soft, rhythmic words her grandfather had used to calm spooked animals. Spokój, spokój, she crooned, her voice carrying the melody of old lullabies. Cicho, moje piękne, nie ma strachu. The horses' ears pricked toward her. Their gallop slowed to a canter, then a trot. She continued her soothing chant, stepping slowly closer, her hands now outstretched. The lead horse, a bay mare with intelligent eyes, whinnied softly and came to a stop just feet from where Amelia stood. She caught the dangling reins, still murmuring her Polish endearments, stroking the mare's neck as the animal's breathing slowed. The second horse, a younger gelding, pressed close to his companion, seeking comfort. "Well, I'll be damned." The voice came from the wagon's driver, who was climbing down on shaking legs. Amelia looked up to see a man unlike the suited gentleman of Main Street. His clothes were practical: worn leather boots, canvas pants, a shirt that had seen many washings. His face was tanned from sun, lined around the eyes from squinting across distances. Dark hair escaped from under a weathered hat. "Pardon my language, miss," he said, pulling off his hat to reveal more of that unruly hair. "But you just saved my horses and probably my fool neck, too. What were you saying to them?" "Words from my home," Amelia said, suddenly self-conscious about her accent. "Polish words for horses. My grandfather, he teach me." The man's face split into a genuine smile, the kind she hadn't seen directed at her since arriving in Willow Ridge. "Polish words, you say? Well, they worked better than any English I was shouting." He extended his hand. "Daniel Hayes. I own the Cottonwood Ranch about 5 miles north." Amelia hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, calloused from work. "Amelia Kowalski." "You're the lady who came to marry Whitmore," Daniel said, and immediately his expression darkened. "Sorry, that's none of my business. Small-town gossip travels fast." "Is truth," Amelia said simply. "He not want Polish wife. My voice, it offend him." Daniel studied her for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Your voice just saved my best horses. Buttercup here," he patted the mare's neck. "She's usually steady as stone. Something spooked her bad, probably a snake. Once she bolts, storm always follows." He was still holding the reins Amelia had caught, and their hands were close on the leather. She pulled away, but he didn't seem to notice her discomfort. "You know horses," he said. It wasn't a question. "In Poland, yes. My grandfather bred them. Not big ranch like here, small farm. But horses are horses, yes? They speak same language everywhere." Daniel laughed, a warm sound that seemed to roll across the prairie. "I suppose they do, though I'd wager they speak Polish better than English, based on what I just witnessed." Despite everything, Amelia found herself almost smiling. Perhaps horses are more understanding than people. "Often are," Daniel agreed. He looked at her more closely, taking in her good dress, now dusty from the road, the careful way she held herself despite her obvious weariness. "Miss Kowalski, this might be forward of me, but do you have plans? Work, I mean. Somewhere to stay?" "I stay at Mrs. Grundy's house." "Work." She shrugged. "No one want Polish girl in their shop." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Their loss. Listen, I need help at the ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is getting on in years. She could use assistance with the house, the garden, and clearly you have a way with horses." "Can you ride?" "Yes, of course." "Cook?" "Polish food, very good. American food, I learn." "The job comes with room and board," Daniel continued, speaking faster as if afraid she might refuse before he finished. "The pay isn't much, $5 a month, but you'd have your own room, better than anything in town, I'd wager. Mrs. Chen is good company, speaks English about as well as my horses, truth be told. Her Chinese accent makes folks in town uncomfortable, too." Amelia's pride rose up. "I do not need charity, Mr. Hayes." "It's not charity," Daniel said firmly. "I need help. You need work. That's business. Besides," he grinned, "any woman who can stop my horses like that is someone I want around." What if they spook again? She wanted to say yes immediately, but forced herself to think. A ranch 5 miles from town, working for a single man, even with another woman present, it could damage her reputation beyond repair. Then again, what reputation? She was already the rejected foreign bride, a subject of gossip and mockery. "When I start?" she asked. Daniel's smile widened. "How about now? I can take you to get your things from Mrs. Grundy's, then we'll head to the ranch, unless you need time to think it over." "No," Amelia said quickly, before she could change her mind. "No, I'm ready now." The ride back to the boarding house drew stares and whispers. Daniel seemed oblivious, chatting easily about his ranch, the challenges of raising cattle in Kansas, the personality quirks of various animals. Amelia found herself relaxing despite the watching eyes. His voice had a musical quality of its own, not refined like Charles's careful pronunciation, but warm and authentic. Mrs. Grundy was scandalized when Amelia announced she was leaving. "You can't seriously be going to work for that Hayes man," she said, clutching her throat as if personally affronted. "Alone on a ranch with him? People will assume the worst." "Mrs. Chen is there," Amelia said, packing her few belongings. "Is respectable." "Mrs. Chen is Chinese," Mrs. Grundy hissed. "That hardly counts as a chaperone." Daniel appeared in the doorway, having helped himself up the stairs despite Mrs. Grundy's protests about men in the female quarters. "Mrs. Grundy, I assure you, Miss Kowalski's virtue is perfectly safe. Probably safer than in town, where supposedly respectable men feel free to mock a lady for her accent." Mrs. Grundy's face flushed. "Mr. Hayes, you know nothing about maintaining proper standards." "I know about treating people with dignity," Daniel interrupted. "Something this town could learn more about." He picked up Amelia's suitcase before she could protest. "Ready, Miss Kowalski?" As they descended the stairs, Amelia heard Mrs. Grundy muttering about foreigners and ranchers who didn't know their place. The words stung less than they might have that morning. Something about Daniel's presence made the judgment of others seem smaller, less significant. The wagon ride to Cottonwood Ranch took them through countryside that grew increasingly beautiful as they left town behind. The prairie opened up, dotted with wildflowers Amelia couldn't name. Cottonwood trees appeared in clusters, their leaves shimmering silver green in the afternoon light. "There," Daniel said finally, pointing ahead. "Home." The ranch house was modest but solid, built of logs with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Smoke rose from the chimney, and gardens spread out to one side. Neat rows of vegetables, herbs, flowers that seemed both practical and decorative. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and Amelia could see cattle grazing in the distance. A small, elderly Chinese woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun. Her face creased into 1,000 wrinkles when she smiled. "Mr. Daniel, you back early," she called, her accent indeed as thick as Amelia's own. "Who this?" "Mrs. Chen, meet Miss Amelia Kowalski. She's going to help you with the house and gardens. Miss Kowalski, this is Mrs. Chen, the real boss of Cottonwood Ranch." Mrs. Chen approached, studying Amelia with shrewd eyes. Then she said something in Chinese that made Daniel laugh. "She says you have good face," he translated. "That's high praise. Mrs. Chen doesn't approve of most people." "Most people not worth approving," Mrs. Chen said in English. She took Amelia's hand in both of hers. "You come. I show your room. Mr. Daniel, you go check cattle. Dinner at 6. Don't be late." As the older woman led her into the house, Amelia glanced back to see Daniel watching them, that warm smile still on his face. He touched the brim of his hat in a small salute before heading toward the barn. The interior of the house was simple but clean, with handmade furniture that spoke of care and craftsmanship. Mrs. Chen led her up wooden stairs to a room under the eaves. It was 3 times the size of her space at Mrs. Grundy's, with a real bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand with a pretty ceramic pitcher, and best of all, a window that looked out over the gardens and prairie beyond. "This your place?" Mrs. Chen said. "You like?" "It's beautiful," Amelia said, tears threatening for the first time that day, but these were tears of relief, not despair. Mrs. Chen patted her arm. "You rest now. Later, we cook together. I teach you American food, you teach me Polish food. We make Mr. Daniel fat and happy, yes? As the older woman shuffled away, Amelia sat on the bed, her bed, and looked out at the view. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold. She could hear horses in the nearby pasture, the distant lowing of cattle, the wind through the cottonwoods that gave the ranch its name. For the first time since stepping off the train in Willow Ridge, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps America might have room for her after all. Not in the rigid society of town where every word was measured and found wanting, but here in this wider space where the prairie didn't care about accents and horses, understood any language spoken with kindness. She unpacked slowly, placing her parents' photograph on the chest of drawers, hanging her 2 dresses on hooks behind the door. When she came to her teaching certificates, she hesitated, then placed them at the bottom of a drawer. That part of her life was over. She was not a teacher anymore, but a ranch helper, a servant of sorts. Yet somehow this felt less like a demotion than a different kind of beginning. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, a large room that smelled of bread and something savory, cooking in a pot on the massive stove. "You know cooking?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Yes, Polish cooking. American, I must learn." "Good. Tonight we make stew. Simple, filling. Mr. Daniel not picky eater, but he work hard, need good food." She handed Amelia a knife and pointed to a pile of vegetables. "You cut, I tell story." As they worked side by side, Mrs. Chen told her about coming to America 15 years ago with her husband, who had worked on the railroad until his death. Daniel's father had hired her when Daniel was just 17, his mother having died in childbirth with a baby who didn't survive. "Mr. Daniel, good man," Mrs. Chen said, stirring the pot. "Different from town men. His papa teach him respect for all people. You see, he never make fun of how I speak, never make me feel small." "Why he not married?" Amelia asked, then blushed at her boldness. Mrs. Chen chuckled. "He almost marry once. Girl from town, pretty thing. But she want him to sell ranch, move to town, become respectable. She say ranch life too hard, too lonely. He choose ranch." "He choose right," Amelia said, surprising herself. "Yes," Mrs. Chen agreed. "Ranch is who he is. Woman who love him must love this life too." When Daniel came in for dinner, he had washed and changed his shirt, his hair still damp and curling at the collar. The 3 of them sat at the kitchen table. Apparently the formal dining room was rarely used. "This is excellent," Daniel said, taking a second helping of stew. "Miss Kowalski, did you help with this?" "I only cut vegetables. Mrs. Chen is teacher." "Well, it's the best meal I've had in weeks. Mrs. Chen usually just threatens to cook for me and makes me fend for myself." Mrs. Chen swatted him with a dish towel. "Lies. You spoiled, that's your problem." Their easy banter made Amelia smile. This was nothing like the stiff, judgmental atmosphere of the boarding house or the cruel dismissals she'd faced in town. Here, accents were simply part of how people spoke, not marks of inadequacy. After dinner, Daniel showed her around the property. The barn housed a dozen horses, including Buttercup and Storm, who nickered in recognition when they saw Amelia. "They remember you," Daniel said, pleased. "Horses don't forget kindness." "Or cruelty," Amelia added softly. "That's true, too." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you face today?" "Cruelty?" "Ignorance," Amelia said. "Fear of different. Is same everywhere, I think." "Not everywhere," Daniel said firmly. "Not here." They walked to the edge of the property where a small creek ran beneath towering cottonwoods. The setting sun turned the water to copper and gold. "My father planted these trees when he first claimed this land," Daniel said. "Everyone said he was crazy. Trees don't naturally grow well here. But he watered them, protected them, and look at them now." "They are beautiful," Amelia said, understanding the metaphor. "Things that don't naturally belong can thrive if given the chance," Daniel said, looking at her. "People, too." That night, lying in her new bed, Amelia listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling into sleep. An owl called in the distance. Horses shifted in their stalls. The house creaked gently in the wind. She thought about Charles Whitmore, probably sitting in his perfectly ordered house in town, surrounded by the respectability he valued so highly. He had rejected her for her voice, the very thing that had saved Daniel's horses. One man's flaw was another man's gift. The days fell into a rhythm. Amelia woke early to help Mrs. Chen with breakfast, learned the art of biscuits and gravy, discovered that American bacon was very different from Polish boczek, but delicious in its own way. After breakfast, while Daniel worked with the cattle, she tended the garden, learning which plants thrived in Kansas soil and which struggled like immigrants in a new land. In the afternoons, she often found herself in the barn. Daniel had noticed her comfort with the horses and gradually gave her more responsibilities: feeding, grooming, exercising the gentler mounts. He taught her to ride Western style, so different from the European way she'd learned as a child. "You're a natural," he said one day, watching her guide Buttercup through a series of turns. "Better than most cowboys I know." "Horses are good teachers," Amelia replied. "They not care about accent." Daniel laughed, but his expression grew serious. "You know, your accent doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I like it. It makes ordinary words sound softer somehow, musical." Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly changed the subject. Evenings were spent in the kitchen, the three of them sharing meals and stories. Daniel talked about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to breed better cattle, to maybe expand into sheep. Mrs. Chen told tales of China, of a village by a river where cormorants helped fishermen catch fish. Amelia shared memories of Poland, the winter festivals, the harvest celebrations, the songs her mother sang. "Sing one," Daniel requested one evening. "My voice," Amelia began. "Your voice is lovely," he said firmly. "Please." So she sang a Polish lullaby, her voice soft in the lamplight. When she finished, Mrs. Chen was wiping her eyes, and Daniel was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you." 2 weeks passed this way, then a month. Amelia's English improved, though her accent remained. She learned to make cornbread and chicken fried steak. The garden flourished under her care, and even the ranch hands who came by occasionally began to nod respectfully to her. Then came the day when Daniel announced they needed supplies from town. "I'd rather not go," Amelia said immediately. "You can't avoid town forever," Daniel said gently. "Besides, I need you to help me pick out fabric. Mrs. Chen wants new curtains, and I'm hopeless with colors." The trip to town felt different with Daniel beside her on the wagon seat. People still stared, but his presence seemed to create a buffer. At the general store, Tom Bailey's demeanor was noticeably cooler toward Daniel. "Hayes," he said curtly. "What can I do for you?" Daniel handed over a list. "The usual supplies. And Miss Kowalski needs to look at fabric." Bailey's eyes darted to Amelia. "The fabric is in the back corner." As Amelia examined bolts of cloth, she became aware of voices nearby, women from town who hadn't noticed her yet. "It's shameful," one was saying, "that Hayes fellow, taking in that foreign woman. You know what kind of arrangement that must be. My herald says Hayes has always been odd, refusing to court proper American girls. Now we know why. He prefers foreigners. And that Chinese woman already there, it's like he's collecting them." Amelia's hands stilled on the fabric. She started to retreat, but then Daniel was beside her, his voice carrying clearly. "Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Appleby," he said pleasantly, "I couldn't help overhearing your concern about my household. How thoughtful of you to take such interest." The women flushed but stood their ground. "Mr. Hayes," Mrs. Morrison said stiffly, "we simply feel that certain standards should be maintained." "Standards," Daniel repeated. "Like kindness? Hospitality? Love thy neighbor as thyself? Those standards?" "You know what we mean," Mrs. Appleby said. "That woman can barely speak proper English." "Miss Kowalski speaks 3 languages," Daniel said, his voice hardening. "How many do you speak, Mrs. Appleby?" Before she could answer, Charles Whitmore entered the store. His eyes found Amelia immediately, and his lip curled. "Well," he said loudly, "I see you found your level, Miss Kowalski. From mail-order bride to ranch servant. Quite a fall." Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between Charles and Amelia. "Actually, Whitmore, I'd say she's risen considerably. From having to endure your correspondence to working with people who value her. Quite an improvement." Charles's face reddened. You always were strange, Hayes. Now you're harboring this foreign woman, that Chinese creature. Careful, Daniel said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. You're talking about people I respect. People who work hard and contribute more to this community than gossip and judgment. Contribute? Charles laughed. What could she possibly contribute? She can't even speak properly. Listen to her, every word mangled by that horrible accent. That horrible accent saved my horses, and probably my life, Daniel said. Her voice calmed them when nothing else could. You know what I think, Whitmore? I think her voice makes the world softer. Every word she speaks has traveled across an ocean through struggles you can't imagine. That accent you mock? It's proof of courage. The store had gone silent. Everyone was watching. Charles sneered. Pretty words, Hayes. But we all know what this really is. A man doesn't take in a young foreign woman without expectations. Daniel's fist clenched, but Amelia placed her hand on his arm. She stepped forward, facing Charles directly. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her accent thick but her voice steady, you reject me because of how I speak. You're right. But Mr. Hayes give me honest work, respect, dignity. Which man is more honorable? She turned to the watching women. You judge me for being foreign, but America is made of foreigners, yes? Unless you are Indian, your family come from somewhere else. Only difference is time. Mrs. Morrison sputtered, but Amelia continued. I work hard. I learn your ways. I hurt no one. If my voice offend you, perhaps problem is not with speaker, but with listener. She selected a bolt of blue fabric and walked to the counter. Mr. Bailey, 3 yards, please. Bailey cut the fabric in silence, his face conflicted. Daniel paid for their supplies, and they left the store with as much dignity as they could muster. But Amelia heard the whispers explode behind them. On the ride home, Daniel was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, I'm proud of you. That took courage. Or stupidity, Amelia said, trying to smile. Now whole town will talk more. Let them talk. They don't matter. They matter to you. This is your home, your reputation. Daniel pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her. My reputation? I'm a rancher who works his own land, pays his debts, and treats people fairly. If that's not enough for them, then their opinion isn't worth having. But, Amelia, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her given name. Do you really think I care more about what those small-minded people think than about doing what's right? She looked at him, this man who had taken her in when everyone else had turned away, who defended her against his own community. Why? She asked. Why you help me? Daniel was quiet for a moment, looking out over the prairie. My mother was Irish, he said finally. Came over during the famine. My father told me how people treated her when she first arrived. The sign saying, no Irish need apply, the mockery of her accent. He said she almost gave up, almost went back to certain starvation rather than endure the humiliation. He turned back to Amelia. But someone gave her a chance. A Quaker family who needed help with their children. They didn't care about her accent, only about her character. She met my father at their church, and, well, here I am. So you help me because of your mother? I help you because it's right, Daniel said. But also, he hesitated, then seemed to gather his courage. Also because from the moment you stepped in front of my horses, speaking those Polish words like a prayer, I knew you were extraordinary. Your accent doesn't hide that. It reveals it. Amelia's heart was beating so hard she was sure he must hear it. Mr. Hayes. Daniel, he corrected, please. Daniel, she said softly, tasting the name. I am just immigrant girl with nothing. You're a woman who crossed an ocean for a new life, he said, who faced rejection with dignity, who brings music to ordinary words, who makes my horses trust her and my kitchen feel like home. That's not nothing. That's everything. Before Amelia could respond, thunder rumbled overhead. The sky had darkened while they talked, and suddenly rain began to fall. Not gentle drops, but a prairie downpour that soaked them in seconds. Daniel urged the horses faster, but by the time they reached the ranch, they were both drenched. Mrs. Chen met them at the door with towels and scolding words about catching their deaths. As Amelia dried her hair by the kitchen fire, She thought about Daniel's words. Charles had seen her accent as a flaw to be rejected. The townspeople saw it as a mark of otherness to be shunned. But Daniel saw it as something else entirely, a testament to her journey, a unique music in a world of ordinary voices. That night, the storm continued, rattling the windows and making the house creak. Amelia couldn't sleep, her mind replaying the scene in the store, Daniel's defense of her, his words in the wagon. She heard footsteps on the stairs and found Daniel in the kitchen, heating milk on the stove. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. Storm is loud, she said, though that wasn't really why. He poured milk into 2 cups, adding honey to both. They sat at the kitchen table, listening to the rain. I need to tell you something, Daniel said suddenly. After what happened today, you should know. People are going to talk more now. They're going to make assumptions about us, ugly ones. It might get worse before it gets better. I understand, Amelia said. If you need me to leave... No, Daniel said quickly. That's not what I'm saying. I'm asking if you're willing to endure it, because I want you to stay. Not just as a worker, but as part of this place, part of my life. Amelia's hands trembled around her cup. Daniel, I know it's too soon, he said. I know you came here for another man, another life. But I need you to know that when I defended you today, it wasn't just about principle. It was because the thought of you being hurt, mocked, dismissed, it makes me angry in a way I've never felt before. You barely know me, Amelia whispered. I know enough, Daniel said. I know you're brave and kind. I know you work hard and sing beautifully. I know my horses trust you and Mrs. Chen adores you. I know that when you're in a room, it feels warmer. And I know that your accent, the one everyone mocks, is the most beautiful sound I've ever heard, because it's yours. Tears were rolling down Amelia's cheeks. You don't know the things I've lost, the reasons I had to leave. Then tell me, Daniel said simply. We have time, all the time you need. So, in the kitchen with the storm raging outside, Amelia told him everything, about her father's school, burned by Prussian soldiers, about her mother's death from typhoid, about the uncle who had tried to force her into marriage with a cruel man 3 times her age, about selling everything for a chance at freedom, only to find rejection waiting for her. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expressions cycling through anger, sorrow, and something tender that made her voice catch. When she finished, he reached across the table and took her hand. You're the bravest person I've ever met, he said. And if you'll let me, I'd like to give you something you've been searching for, a home. Not as a servant or employee, but as more, whatever you're willing to let it become. The town will never accept it, Amelia said. Then we'll build our own world here, Daniel said. The ranch is big enough. We'll go to town when we must, but our life will be here, with the horses and the gardens and Mrs. Chen's cooking and your Polish lullabies. You make it sound simple. Love is simple, Daniel said, then colored. I mean, that is... I know what you mean, Amelia said softly. She squeezed his hand. But it's too soon for such words. Can we, how you say, court, properly? Daniel's smile was radiant. Yes, we can court. Though I should warn you, I have no idea how to court properly. Do I need to write you letters? You are here. No letters needed, Amelia laughed, the first real laugh she'd had since arriving in America. But perhaps flowers. Polish girls like flowers. I can do flowers, Daniel said eagerly. The prairie is full of them. I'll bring you so many flowers you'll run out of places to put them. The storm was passing, the rain gentling to a patter. Amelia stood, still holding his hand. Thank you, she said, for seeing me, not just foreign girl with accent. Thank you, Daniel replied, for making my world softer with your voice. The weeks following that stormy night brought a sweetness to Cottonwood Ranch that made the increasing hostility from town easier to bear. Daniel kept his promise about flowers, arriving at the kitchen door each morning with prairie roses, black-eyed Susans, or delicate purple asters that he'd picked during his early rounds checking cattle. Amelia would accept them with a smile that made his day worthwhile before he'd even started working, arranging them in mason jars throughout the house, until Mrs. Chen complained they were running out of containers for preserves. But if the ranch had become a sanctuary, the town of Willow Ridge had transformed into something altogether different. The confrontation at the general store had spread through the community like wildfire, twisted and embellished with each retelling until it bore little resemblance to what had actually occurred. In some versions, Amelia had cursed at the respectable ladies in Polish. In others, Daniel had threatened to shoot Charles Whitmore. The most vicious rumors suggested that Amelia was practicing some kind of foreign witchcraft that had bewitched poor Daniel Hayes into defending her. The first Sunday after the incident, Daniel suggested they attend church together. "We've nothing to hide, Mus," he said firmly. "Let them see us sitting in God's house like the decent people we are." Amelia wore her best dress, the one she'd planned to be married in, a deep blue wool that her mother had helped her sew before the illness took her, Mrs. Chen had helped her alter it slightly, taking it in, where months of travel and worry had thinned her frame. Daniel wore his church clothes, a proper suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome, his usually unruly hair tamed with pomade. They entered the church 5 minutes before the service, not so early as to endure excessive staring, not so late as to seem ashamed. The whispers started immediately, rustling through the congregation like wind through wheat. Daniel guided Amelia to his usual pew, midway down on the left, where his family had sat for 20 years. The space around them remained conspicuously empty. Families that would normally have filled the nearby pews crowded together further back or pressed into already full rows up front. Only old Mr. Jameson, nearly deaf and half-blind, took his usual seat 2 rows behind them, oblivious to the social catastrophe apparently occurring. Reverend Michaels took the pulpit, his thin face grave. His sermon that morning was on the subject of purity, of keeping oneself separate from corrupting influences, of the dangers of allowing foreign ideas to take root in American soil. His eyes never quite met Daniel's, but his message was clear enough. Amelia felt Daniel's hand find hers, squeezing gently in reassurance, though she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. After the service, they were the first to leave, walking past clusters of parishioners who fell silent at their approach and exploded into conversation once they'd passed. At the wagon, Charles Whitmore was waiting, flanked by Tom Bailey and several other prominent townsmen. "Hayes," Charles said, his voice carrying intentionally, "we need to discuss your situation." "There's no situation to discuss," Daniel replied evenly, helping Amelia onto the wagon seat. "You're harboring a woman of questionable morals." Daniel turned slowly, his movements controlled but somehow more menacing for it. "Choose your next words very carefully, Whitmore." "We're concerned citizens," Tom Bailey interjected quickly. "The moral fabric of our community is apparently so fragile that one Polish woman can tear it apart?" Daniel asked. "Gentlemen, if you have legitimate business with me, you know where to find my ranch. Otherwise, I'll thank you to step away from my wagon." "Your father would be ashamed," Charles said as a parting shot. Daniel paused, his knuckles white on the wagon's side. "My father taught me to judge people by their character, not their accent. He would be proud that I didn't let a good woman be run out of town by small-minded cowards." He climbed onto the seat and guided the horses away, leaving the cluster of men looking like thwarted roosters in their Sunday best. But Amelia noticed his hand shaking slightly on the reins. "I'm ruining your life," she said quietly once they were out of town. "No," Daniel said firmly. "They're trying to ruin it." There's a difference, but the campaign against them had only begun. The next week, Daniel found that Bailey's general store had suddenly run out of essential supplies just when he arrived. The feed store claimed their credit system had changed and demanded immediate cash payment. The farrier was too busy to shoe his horses, though he seemed to have plenty of time for everyone else. More seriously, 3 of Daniel's ranch hands quit without notice. When he tracked them down, they admitted sheepishly that they'd been threatened with blacklisting if they continued working for him. Only Jake Martinez and Old Pete stayed on. Jake because he'd faced his own discrimination as a Mexican-American and wouldn't be party to it against someone else, and Pete because he was too old and stubborn to care what anyone thought. The isolation might have been bearable if it had stopped at social shunning, but soon more aggressive tactics emerged. Fences were cut in the night, allowing cattle to scatter. Salt was poured on a section of Amelia's carefully tended garden, killing everything it touched. One morning, they woke to find foreign horror painted on the side of the barn in large red letters. Daniel spent hours scrubbing the paint away, his face dark with rage, while Amelia pretended not to have seen it. But that night, she heard him pacing in his room, the floorboards creaking with his restless anger. Mrs. Chen was the one who finally confronted the situation directly. "You two dancing around each other while town tries to destroy you," she said over breakfast, her weathered face stern. "Foolish. You want each other, yes? Then be together. Let them choke on their hate." "It's not that simple," Daniel said. "Is exactly that simple," Mrs. Chen retorted. "You think they treat you better if she leave? Number. They already decide you are enemy. Fighting separately makes you weak. Together, strong." That afternoon, a delegation of church ladies arrived at the ranch. Amelia saw them coming from the garden and quickly retreated to the house. But they weren't there for her. They surrounded Daniel near the barn, their faces pinched with righteous determination. Mrs. Morrison, apparently elected as spokesperson, launched into what was clearly a prepared speech. "Daniel Hayes, we've come as Christian women concerned for your immortal soul. This foreign woman has clearly used her wiles to corrupt you, to turn you from the path of righteousness. We're here to offer you redemption. Send her away, and all can be forgiven. Reverend Michaels has even agreed to lead a special prayer service for your recovery from her influence." Daniel set down the bridle he'd been repairing and gave them his full attention. "Ladies, I appreciate your concern, misguided as it is, but I have a question for you. How many of you have actually spoken to Miss Kowalski? Had a conversation with her beyond your gossip circles?" The women exchanged glances. "We don't need to speak with her to know—" "To know what?" Daniel interrupted. "That she works harder than any 3 people in town? That she speaks 3 languages and can discuss literature and mathematics? That she's kind to animals and generous to others? Or do you just know that she has an accent and that's enough to condemn her?" "The Bible says," Mrs. Appleby began. "The Bible says, 'Love thy neighbor as thyself,'" Daniel quoted. "It says, 'Judge not, lest ye be judged.' It says to welcome strangers because they might be angels unaware. Would you like me to continue? I've been reading it quite carefully lately, looking for the part where Jesus said to torment foreign women. Haven't found that chapter yet." Mrs. Morrison's face flushed purple. "You're mocking us." "No, ma'am. I'm pointing out your hypocrisy. You claim Christian virtue while acting with cruelty that would make the Pharisees proud." "We're trying to save you," Mrs. Appleby cried. "From what? From the woman who saved my horses and probably my life? From someone who brings beauty and grace to my home? From the first real happiness I've known since my mother died?" Daniel's voice had risen, carrying across the yard where Amelia listened from behind the kitchen door. "Ladies, if that's what you're saving me from, I decline your salvation." The delegation left in a huff, but not before Mrs. Morrison delivered a final warning. "You're choosing her over your community, Daniel Hayes. When she betrays you, and she will, her kind always do, you'll have no one to turn to." "If my community requires me to be cruel to innocents to belong, then it's not a community worth having," Daniel replied. That evening, Amelia found Daniel sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands. She sat beside him, not speaking, just present. The sun was setting, turning the prairie golden, and somewhere a meadowlark was singing its evening song. "I'm sorry," Daniel said finally. "You came here for a new life, and I've made it worse." "No," Amelia said firmly. "You gave me home when everyone else gave only rejection. The town, they would hate me with or without you. At least now I am not alone in their hatred." Daniel looked at her, his gray eyes tired but warm. "We make quite a pair, don't we? The strange rancher and the foreign woman." "Could be worse," Amelia said, attempting lightness. "Could be strange foreign woman and rancher who cannot protect his horses." That startled a laugh out of him. "True. Where would I be without your Polish horse whispering?" They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Then Daniel said, "I've been thinking about what Mrs. Chen said, about being stronger together." Amelia's heart rate picked up. "Yes? I know we said we'd court properly, take time. But the town isn't going to give us that luxury. Every day we're apart, they see weakness they can exploit. But if we were married, He turned to face her fully. Amelia, this isn't how I wanted to do this. You deserve flowers and moonlight and pretty words. But will you marry me? Not because the town is forcing us, but because I've fallen completely in love with you, accent and all. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. Daniel, you hardly know me 3 months. I knew in 3 minutes, he said simply. When you stood in front of those horses, fearless, speaking words I couldn't understand, but that sounded like music. When you face down Charles Whitmore with more dignity than he's ever possessed. When you sing Polish lullabies while cooking and don't realize I'm listening from the doorway. You listen? Every chance I get. He took her hands in his. Amelia Kowalski, you asked if we could court properly. Well, I'm courting you now, as properly as I know how. I'm asking you to be my wife, to build a life with me here despite what the town thinks. To fill this ranch with Polish songs and American dreams, and maybe, someday, children who speak both languages. Amelia thought of Charles Whitmore, who had rejected her at first sound, of the townspeople who saw her accent as a disease to be quarantined. Then she looked at Daniel, who heard music where others heard mistakes, who defended her with fierce loyalty, who brought her flowers every morning just to see her smile. Yes, she said softly, then stronger. Yes, Daniel Hayes, I will marry you. His kiss was gentle, tentative, as if he couldn't quite believe she'd agreed. When they pulled apart, Mrs. Chen was standing in the doorway, grinning broadly. About time, she said. Now we plan wedding. Small, yes? Just us and few friends? Very small, Daniel agreed. Judge Patterson will marry us. He owes me a favor from when I helped save his ranch from foreclosure. He won't dare refuse. The town will be furious, Amelia warned. Let them be, Daniel said, pulling her closer. We'll be married. The wedding took place a week later in the parlor of Cottonwood Ranch. True to his word, Judge Patterson performed the ceremony, though his discomfort was obvious. Jake Martinez and Old Pete served as witnesses, Mrs. Chen as makeshift matron of honor. Amelia wore her blue dress with wildflowers in her hair. Daniel wore his church suit with a boutonniere of prairie roses. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional except for when Daniel added, I promise to love your voice in all its accents, your songs in all their languages, and to never let anyone make you feel less than the extraordinary woman you are. Amelia, crying openly now, added her own, I promise to make your world softer with my words, stronger with my love, and to stand beside you no matter what storms come. Judge Patterson declared them married and fled immediately after signing the certificate, clearly anxious to distance himself from the scandal. But the small wedding party celebrated with a feast Mrs. Chen had been preparing for days, a fusion of Chinese, Polish, and American dishes that somehow worked perfectly together, like the unlikely family they'd become. That night, as Amelia moved her few belongings into Daniel's room, now their room, she found a gift on the dresser. It was a leather journal, beautifully bound, with a note in Daniel's careful handwriting, for your thoughts in any language you choose. Your words are always welcome here. The town's reaction to the marriage was swift and vicious. The next Sunday, Reverend Michaels refused to acknowledge them when they entered church, and several families actually got up and moved when they sat down. The sermon that day was about the dangers of being unequally yoked, about the corruption of bloodlines, about the importance of maintaining God's natural order. Daniel stood up halfway through the sermon. Reverend, he said, his voice carrying clearly, I have a question. When Christ ate with tax collectors and sinners, was he corrupting himself? When he spoke to the Samaritan woman at the well, was he violating God's natural order? Mr. Hayes, this is not the time. When is the time, Reverend, when you're not using God's pulpit to justify your prejudice? He took Amelia's hand and led her out of the church. As they left, they heard one voice call out, Good riddance! But they also heard another, quieter voice, old Mr. Jameson, say, Shame on all of you. That's a good man you're driving away. The economic warfare intensified. No one would buy Daniel's cattle at fair prices, forcing him to drive them to markets further away at greater expense. The bank, where Charles Whitmore wielded considerable influence, called in a loan earlier than scheduled, though Daniel managed to pay it by selling some horses he'd been planning to keep for breeding. Then came the night when they woke to the smell of smoke. The barn was on fire. Daniel and Jake ran for the horses while Amelia and Mrs. Chen worked the pump, filling buckets in a desperate battle against the flames. Old Pete rode hard for town to get help, but Amelia knew no one would come. They managed to save the horses, Amelia using her Polish words to calm them as she led them out through smoke and fear. But the barn was lost, along with the winter's hay supply and most of their tools and tack. As they stood watching the remaining timbers collapse in a shower of sparks, Sheriff Campbell arrived, alone, despite the orange glow that must have been visible from town. "Anyone see who did this?" he asked perfunctorily. "You know damn well who's behind this," Daniel said, his face black with soot and rage. "Without proof, there's nothing I can do," Campbell said. "Maybe it was an accident." Lantern knocked over, spontaneous combustion in the hay. "There was no lantern," Daniel said flatly, "and hay doesn't spontaneously combust in November." Campbell shrugged. "Like I said, without proof." He mounted his horse. "You might want to consider that you're bringing this on yourself, Hayes." Man makes his choices. He lives with the consequences. After he left, they stood in a small, exhausted circle. Daniel, Amelia, Mrs. Chen, Jake, and old Pete. "You should go," Jake said quietly. "Take Mrs. Hayes and start fresh somewhere else. Colorado maybe, or California. Somewhere her accent won't matter so much." "This is my land," Daniel said stubbornly. "My father's land. I won't be driven off it." "Your father never faced this kind of hate," Pete pointed out. "There's brave and there's foolish, boy." But Amelia stepped forward, her face streaked with soot and tears, but her voice strong. "No, we do not run. They want us to run, to prove we do not belong. But we do belong. This is our home." She looked at each of them in turn. "In Poland, I see what happens when people run from hate. It does not stop hate. It makes it stronger. Hate only stops when people stand against it." "The lady's got a point," Pete said after a moment, "though standing against it might get us all burned out." "Maybe," Daniel said, "but if we run, they win. And then they'll do it to the next person who doesn't fit their narrow idea of American. And the next." Mrs. Chen, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. "We rebuild. Barn raised like old days, but not just us. There are others who think town is wrong, but too scared to say. We asked them. It seemed impossible that anyone would help them, but Mrs. Chen was insistent. The next day, she and Amelia hitched up the wagon and began visiting the outlying farms and ranches, the places where people scraped by on the margins, less concerned with town society than survival. At the Zimmerman place, where a German family struggled with rocky soil, Amelia's ability to speak some German broke through their initial suspicion, and Mrs. Zimmerman had tears in her eyes as she spoke about their own early years, when their accent marked them as outsiders. "We help," Mr. Zimmerman said firmly. "Is not right. What town does?" At the Martinez family ranch, where Jake's extended family raised sheep, they found immediate allies. "We know what it's like," Jake's mother said simply. "Being told you don't belong. See, we help." The Svenssons, Swedish immigrants who'd arrived only 2 years before, volunteered immediately. The three Collins brothers, Irish Catholics in a Protestant town, offered their labor and their lumber mills services at cost. Even some unexpected allies emerged, the widow Harper, who'd been ostracized herself after refusing to remarry according to town expectations, and Doc Brennan, who'd been quietly appalled by the town's behavior but hadn't known how to act. The barn raising was scheduled for the following Saturday. Daniel expected maybe a dozen people if they were lucky. But as the sun rose that morning, wagons began arriving. First the ones they'd expected, the Zimmermans, the Martinezes, the Svenssons, then others, the Jackson family, freed slaves who'd faced their own battles for acceptance, the Kowalskis, no relation, Polish immigrants who'd settled far from town to avoid exactly what Amelia had faced, the Changs, who ran a laundry and had heard about Mrs. Chen's situation. By mid-morning, there were 40 people on the ranch, carrying lumber, mixing mortar, raising beams. The women had set up outdoor kitchens, and the air filled with the scents of a dozen different cuisines. Children ran between the workers, carrying water and tools, their voices mixing English with Spanish, German, Polish, Swedish, and Chinese. Amelia stood watching it all, tears streaming down her face. Daniel found her and wrapped his arms around her. "What's wrong?" he asked, concerned. "Nothing wrong," she said. "It's beautiful. All these people, all these accents, all these languages working together. This is America I dreamed of." The work was hard, but filled with a joy that had been absent from the ranch for months. When the Svensson boys started a Swedish work song, the Mexicans responded with their own. Soon it became a friendly competition, each group sharing their traditional music. Amelia taught them a Polish building song her grandfather had sung, her voice clear and strong, no longer ashamed of its accent. By evening, the barn frame stood complete, solid and defiant against the darkening sky. It would need weeks more work to finish, but the hardest part was done. As the helpers prepared to leave, each family stopped to shake Daniel and Amelia's hands, to offer continued support. "You need anything, you ask," Mr. Zimmerman said firmly. "Mi casa es su casa," Jake's mother said, embracing Amelia. The widow Harper pressed a preserved pie into Amelia's hands. "Don't let them win, dear. Those of us who don't fit their mold need to stick together." As the last wagon rolled away, Daniel, Amelia, Mrs. Chen, Jake, and Pete stood looking at the new barn frame silhouetted against the stars. "Town's not going to like this," Pete observed. "Good," Mrs. Chen said with satisfaction. "Let them not like. We have our own town now, better town." She was right. The barn raising marked a turning point not just for the ranch, but for the surrounding community. The outcasts, the immigrants, the different, they began to band together. They traded with each other, supported each other's businesses, created their own social events. When the general store continued to refuse Daniel's service, the Zimmermans started bringing supplies from a town 30 miles away, selling them from their farm at cost to anyone Bailey's store had rejected. When the church remained hostile, Doc Brennan started hosting Sunday gatherings at his home, reading from the Bible and emphasizing messages of love and acceptance. The town's establishment found their economic weapons less effective when their targets had alternatives. Some even began to worry they'd gone too far. Several farming families who'd remained neutral started trading with the immigrant network simply because the prices were better and the treatment fairer. Then Charles Whitmore made a fatal error. He arrived at the ranch on a Tuesday afternoon, alone but for a legal document in his hand. Daniel was out checking cattle, but Amelia was in the garden. She stood as he approached, wiping soil from her hands. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, the title dripping with mockery. "Or should I say Miss Kowalski, since I doubt your marriage is even legal." "Is legal," Amelia said calmly. "Judge Patterson himself performed ceremony." "Perhaps. But there are questions about your legal status in this country. Did you know that there are laws about moral character for immigrants? That those found to be of questionable virtue can be deported?" He held up the document. "I've been in communication with federal authorities. They're very interested in investigating a foreign woman who may have entered the country under false pretenses, who's been accused of witchcraft and moral corruption." Amelia's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression steady. "I enter legally, all papers correct. Papers can be questioned. Witnesses can be found to testify about your influence on Mr. Hayes, how you bewitched him, turned him against his own people." Charles stepped closer. "But I'm a reasonable man. Leave. Tonight. Get on a train and disappear, and this document never gets sent. And if I refuse, then I'll destroy you, and Daniel too, for harboring you." His smile was cruel. "Did you know that helping an illegal immigrant is a federal crime? He could lose everything. His land, his freedom." Amelia felt the world spinning. Everything they'd built, everyone who'd helped them, it could all be destroyed because of her. "I need time to think," she said quietly. "You have until tomorrow noon. Come to my office with your decision." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day, Mrs. Hayes." As his buggy disappeared down the road, Amelia sank to her knees in the dirt. When Mrs. Chen found her an hour later, she was still there, staring at nothing. "What happened?" Mrs. Chen demanded. Amelia told her everything. Mrs. Chen's face darkened with each word. You not thinking of leaving? If it saves Daniel. No, Mrs. Chen said fiercely. You leave. You let evil win. You break Daniel's heart. You solve nothing. But if they deport me anyway, then we fight. With truth, with law, with friends. Mrs. Chen helped her to her feet. You think you alone? You not alone anymore. When Daniel returned that evening, dusty and tired from a day of mending fences, he knew immediately something was wrong. Amelia tried to hide it, but he knew her too well now. Finally, she told him about Charles's visit. Daniel's rage was terrible to see. He grabbed his rifle and headed for the door, but Amelia caught his arm. No, you kill him. You prove everything they say about us. He threatened you. He threatened to destroy our life. And if you shoot him, he succeeds, Amelia said. Please, Daniel. We must be smarter than hate. Daniel stood there, rifle in hand, breathing hard. Then slowly, he set the weapon down and pulled Amelia into his arms. I won't let them take you, he said fiercely. I'll fight them in court, in the newspapers, wherever I have to. And if we lose, then we'll go to Canada, Mexico, somewhere. But we go together. That night they held each other close, both aware it might be one of their last nights in the home they'd built. But in the morning, an unexpected ally appeared. Judge Patterson arrived just after breakfast, looking uncomfortable but determined. Daniel, Mrs. Hayes, he said formally, I heard about Whitmore's threats. I came to tell you that I've already written to the federal marshal in Topeka. I've provided a sworn statement that your marriage is legal and that I've seen no evidence of any wrongdoing. Why? Daniel asked, stunned. Patterson sighed. Because I've been a coward. I performed your wedding but then distanced myself to protect my reputation. But watching what this town has become, the cruelty masquerading as righteousness, my conscience won't let me stand by anymore. He handed them a letter. This is a copy of what I sent. I also mentioned that Charles Whitmore has been making false accusations against law-abiding citizens and suggested he might be investigated for abuse of the legal system. Amelia felt hope flicker. Thank you, Judge. Don't thank me yet. Whitmore has influence, but not as much as he thinks. And there's something else. I've been quietly talking to other townspeople who are disgusted by all this. You have more support than you know. Hidden support, perhaps, but it's there. As noon approached, Daniel insisted on accompanying Amelia to town. They walked into Charles's bank together, heads high. Charles was behind his desk, supremely confident. Well, he said, have you come to agree to my terms? No, Amelia said clearly. I stay. This is my home, my country now, and you cannot change that with threats. Charles's face darkened. Then you've sealed your fate. Actually, Daniel interrupted, you've sealed yours. He pulled out Judge Patterson's letter. The federal marshal has been notified about your harassment and false accusations. Making fraudulent claims to federal authorities is a serious crime, Whitmore. For the first time, Charles looked uncertain. Patterson wouldn't dare. He already has. And he's not alone. Doc Brennan, the widow Harper, even some of your fellow businessmen are prepared to testify about your campaign of harassment against my wife. Daniel leaned forward. You overplayed your hand, Charles. People might turn a blind eye to social shunning, but burning barns and federal fraud? That's too far, even for them. The door to Charles's office opened, and Sheriff Campbell entered, but not alone. With him was a man in a federal marshal's uniform. Marshal Thompson, the lawman said, I'm here to investigate claims of conspiracy to file false federal charges and destruction of property. He looked at Charles. Mr. Whitmore, I'll need to see all correspondence you've had regarding Mrs. Hayes's immigration status. Charles went pale. This is ridiculous. I was merely concerned. Save it for the judge, Marshal Thompson said. He turned to Amelia. Mrs. Hayes, I've reviewed your immigration documents. Everything is in perfect order. Anyone suggesting otherwise is either mistaken or lying. The investigation that followed revealed more than Charles's harassment. It uncovered a pattern of financial irregularities at the bank, loans denied or called in early based on personal vendettas rather than financial criteria. Within a month, Charles was facing federal charges, his reputation in ruins. The town's reaction was mixed. Some doubled down on their prejudice, but others began to question what they'd been part of. Mrs. Morrison publicly apologized at a town meeting, admitting she'd let fear and gossip guide her rather than Christian charity. Tom Bailey quietly resumed selling to Daniel, though neither man mentioned the months of refusal. Not everyone changed, but enough did that life became bearable again. The alliance of outsiders that had formed during the barn raising continued to grow, creating a parallel community that was, in many ways, stronger than the traditional town structure. One evening in early spring, as Amelia worked in her restored garden, she heard horses approaching, multiple horses, moving fast. Fear spiked. Had the harassment resumed? But it was Jake Martinez riding hard with news. The news. "Mrs. Hayes! There's been an accident at the Zimmerman place. Their little girl, Greta, she's trapped under an overturned wagon." Without hesitation, Amelia grabbed the medical supplies Doc Brennan had taught her to use and rode with Jake to the Zimmerman farm. They arrived to find chaos. The wagon had rolled while crossing a steep grade, pinning 6-year-old Greta beneath it. The men were trying to lift it, but every movement made the girl scream. Amelia dropped to her belly, crawling partially under the wagon to reach the child. She began speaking in German, the soothing voice she'd used with horses, with frightened children in Poland. "Say still, Kleine," she murmured. "Be still, little one. We will free you soon." She kept talking, telling Greta stories in German while assessing her injuries. The child's leg was clearly broken, but more concerning was the weight on her chest. As the men coordinated to lift the wagon, Amelia positioned herself to pull Greta free the instant there was space. The moment came. The wagon lifted, Amelia pulled, and Greta was free. Amelia immediately began the first aid Doc Brennan had taught her, stabilizing the leg and checking for internal injuries. By the time Doc himself arrived, the immediate crisis had passed. "You saved her life," Doc Brennan said, after examining the child. "A few more minutes under that weight." Mrs. Zimmerman was sobbing, clutching Amelia's hands. "Danke, danke," she repeated in German, then switched to accented English. "You save my baby. You are angel." Word of the rescue spread quickly. It was hard to maintain prejudice against someone who'd risked her own safety to save a child. Even some of Amelia's harshest critics found it difficult to reconcile their image of her as a dangerous foreign influence with the woman who'd crawled under a wagon to comfort a frightened little girl in her native language. Spring arrived late that year, as if the prairie itself had been holding its breath through the long winter of conflict. The rescue at the Zimmerman farm had shifted something fundamental in the community's perception, but old prejudices died hard, especially among those who had invested so much in maintaining them. Amelia found herself in a strange limbo, no longer actively persecuted but not truly accepted either, existing in a space between worlds that felt both liberating and lonely. It was on a morning in late April when everything changed again. Daniel had gone to a cattle auction in Dodge City, a 3-day journey that left Amelia managing the ranch with Jake and Old Pete's help. She was checking the vegetable garden, noting with satisfaction how the plants had recovered from the salt attack, when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching fast from the direction of town. Her first thought was fire, someone needing help. But as the rider came into view, she recognized Tom Bailey's oldest son, Matthew, his face white with panic. "Mrs. Hayes!" he gasped, sliding from his horse before it had fully stopped. "Please, you have to come. There's been a terrible accident at the railway construction site, an explosion, many hurt. Doc Brennan sent me to fetch you. He says he needs your help." Amelia didn't hesitate. She knew Doc had been training her not just for the ranch's needs, but because he'd recognized her natural ability with the injured and frightened. She gathered medical supplies into saddlebags while calling for Jake to ready her horse. "Mrs. Chen, you're in charge," she called to the older woman, who nodded grimly. "You be careful, Miss Amelia. Town might not be safe for you alone." But there was no time for fear. Amelia rode hard beside Matthew, her mind already preparing for what she might find. The railway had been extending a line through the area, bringing Chinese and Irish workers who camped outside town, viewed with even more suspicion than she had been. The scene at the construction site was chaos. The explosion had been in a tunnel they were blasting through a hill. Men lay scattered on the ground, some moaning, others ominously still. Doc Brennan was moving between them, overwhelmed, his shirt already bloody from his efforts. "Thank God," he said when he saw Amelia. "I need you to take the Chinese workers. None of them speak enough English to tell me what's wrong, and they won't let the townswomen near them." Amelia looked where he pointed. A group of Chinese workers huddled together, some clearly injured, all suspicious and frightened. The town's treatment of outsiders had taught them to expect nothing but hostility. She approached slowly, her hands visible and empty. One of the workers, an older man with a bleeding head wound, raised his hand as if to ward her off. "Please," Amelia said, then stopped. She thought of Mrs. Chen, of the few Chinese phrases she'd learned. "Wo bang ni," she said carefully. "I help you." The man's eyes widened in surprise. Amelia continued in her broken Chinese, supplemented with gestures, explaining she was a friend of Mrs. Chen, that she wanted to help. When that wasn't enough, she began speaking in Polish, her tone the same soothing cadence she used with frightened horses and children. The absurdity of it, a Polish woman speaking her native language to Chinese workers in Kansas, somehow broke through their fear. The older man slowly lowered his hand and pointed to a younger worker whose leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. For the next hours, Amelia worked among the Chinese workers while Doc Brennan handled the Irish and American injured. She set bones, cleaned wounds, and offered comfort in a mixture of languages that somehow communicated what mattered: care, respect, humanity. At one point, she became aware of townspeople watching her. Mrs. Morrison and Mrs. Appleby had arrived with other church ladies to help, but stood frozen, watching Amelia work among men they considered beneath even her foreign status. Yet they could see what she was doing, saving lives with no thought to nationality or race. The most critically injured was a young Chinese man, barely more than a boy, with a piece of metal embedded in his chest. Doc Brennan took one look and shook his head slightly, but Amelia refused to accept it. She'd seen similar injuries in Poland during the violence. Working carefully, she managed to extract the metal while controlling the bleeding, using techniques her mother had taught her from the old country's folk medicine combined with what Doc had shown her. The boy survived. As the sun set, the crisis finally passed. The injured had been treated or transported to better facilities. Amelia stood swaying with exhaustion, covered in blood and dirt, when she felt a presence beside her. It was the older Chinese man she'd first approached, the one with the head wound she'd bandaged. He bowed deeply, then said in careful English, "You saved my nephew, my brother's son." He gestured to the boy with the chest wound. "We not forget, never forget." Before Amelia could respond, he pressed something into her hand, a small jade pendant on a silk cord. "For protection," he said. "For friend." As the Chinese workers departed, supporting their injured, Amelia became aware that half the town seemed to have gathered. The story of what had happened was already spreading, growing with each telling. The foreign woman they'd tried to drive out had spent the day saving lives, treating men that even Doc Brennan couldn't communicate with, showing compassion that transcended every barrier they'd tried to erect. Tom Bailey approached hesitantly, hat in hand. "Mrs. Hayes, what you did today, I owe you an apology, a big one. I let fear and ignorance guide me, and I was wrong." Before Amelia could respond, Matthew Bailey stepped forward. "She saved Li Wei's life, Pa. The Chinese boy. I saw her pull metal out of his chest with her bare hands, gentle as anything, while speaking some language I couldn't understand but that kept him calm. If that's not American values, helping folks, saving lives, then I don't know what is." One by one, others approached. Not everyone. Some still stood apart, faces hard with stubborn prejudice. But enough, Mrs. Morrison, tears on her weathered face, took Amelia's blood-stained hands. "I've been a fool," she said simply. "A Christian fool, which might be the worst kind. Can you forgive me?" Amelia was too exhausted for speeches, too drained for grand gestures of forgiveness. She simply nodded, and somehow that small motion seemed to release something that had been held tight in the community for months. Doc Brennan drove her home in his buggy, her horse tied behind. "You did something remarkable today," he said. "Not just the medical work, though that was impressive. You showed them that difference doesn't mean dangerous, that foreign doesn't mean threat. I just helped, Amelia said wearily, is what anyone would do. No, Doc said firmly, it's what anyone should do. But most don't. Most can't see past their fear. When they arrived at the ranch, Daniel's horse was in the corral. He must have returned early from Dodge City. He came running from the house, his face tight with worry that transformed to relief when he saw her. I heard there was an explosion, he said, helping her from the buggy. That you were there. Your wife is a hero, Doc Brennan interrupted. She saved at least a dozen lives today, probably more. The Chinese workers especially. Without her, we'd have lost most of them. Daniel's arms came around her, heedless of the blood and dirt. Of course she did, he murmured into her hair. Of course you did. That night, after she'd bathed and eaten, after she'd told Daniel and Mrs. Chen everything, Amelia sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. Daniel sat beside her, holding her hand. Things will be different now, he said. You know that, right? After today, even the stubborn ones will have to reconsider. Maybe, Amelia said, but I did not do it for them. I did it because was right. I know, that's what makes it matter. They sat in comfortable silence until Amelia spoke again. The Chinese man, he give me this. She showed Daniel the jade pendant, said for protection, for friend. Put it on, Daniel suggested. As she fastened the cord around her neck, the green stone resting against her throat, Daniel said, You know what I realized while I was in Dodge City? I was miserable. 3 days without hearing your voice, your accent that everyone mocked. It was like the world had gone flat, lost all its music. Daniel, no, let me finish. I used to think I was defending you out of principle, out of rightness, and that was part of it. But the truth is, I was defending you because I can't imagine a world without your voice in it. Your accent isn't a flaw, Amelia. It's proof that you've lived, that you've survived, that you've been brave enough to cross oceans and learn new languages and still keep the music of where you came from. Tears rolled down Amelia's cheeks. When I first came, Charles said my voice was embarrassment, that I would bring shame. Charles is facing federal charges and has lost everything, Daniel reminded her, while you just saved half the railway workers and earned the respect of people who matter. I'd say your voice brought healing, not shame. Over the following weeks, the change in town was gradual but undeniable. The general store began stocking items the Chinese and Irish workers needed. The church started offering English lessons that Amelia helped teach, using her own experience to bridge the gap between languages. Even Reverend Michaels, stiff and uncomfortable but trying, asked her to speak at a service about the Good Samaritan, about helping those different from ourselves. But the most significant change came from an unexpected source. One afternoon in May, a carriage arrived at the ranch. Not a farm wagon, but an elegant Eastern carriage that looked out of place on the prairie. From it stepped a well-dressed woman in her 50s, her bearing regal, her clothes worth more than most ranch families saw in a year. I'm looking for Mrs. Amelia Hayes, she said, her accent crisp, educated, Eastern. I am she, Amelia said, wiping her hands on her apron, acutely aware of her simple dress and work-roughened hands. The woman studied her for a long moment. I'm Margaret Sinclair. Charles Whitmore was my nephew. Amelia tensed and Daniel moved protectively closer, but Mrs. Sinclair raised a hand. Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. Quite the opposite. She looked around the ranch with interested eyes. Might we speak privately? They sat in the parlor, Mrs. Chen serving tea with barely concealed suspicion. Mrs. Sinclair sipped delicately, then set down her cup with decision. I've come from Boston to deal with Charles's affairs, she began. The federal investigation has revealed troubling things, not just about his recent behavior, but patterns going back years. I've discovered he drove 3 other women away with similar tactics, women he'd corresponded with, promised marriage, then rejected for manufactured reasons. Amelia's hands tightened on her teacup. Others? A young woman from Ireland, another from Italy, and a widow from Georgia whose accent he deemed too southern. Mrs. Sinclair's mouth twisted with disgust. He enjoyed the power, I think. The correspondence, the control, the rejection. You were simply the first to stay and fight back. Why you tell me this? Amelia asked. Because I owe you an apology on behalf of my family, and because I want to make amends. She pulled out a leather portfolio. Charles's assets are being liquidated to pay his legal fees and settlements. But before that, I've arranged for compensation to those he wronged. This is yours. The sum on the document made Amelia gasp. It was enough to build 3 barns, to buy more land, to secure the ranch's future for years. I cannot accept, Amelia began. You can, and you will, Mrs. Sinclair said firmly. It's not charity. It's justice. Charles tried to destroy you because of your accent, your origin. Let his wealth now build the life he tried to prevent. She stood to leave, then turned back. I heard about the railway accident, about what you did. My family came to America 3 generations ago from France. We worked hard to erase our accent, our difference, to blend in. But in doing so, we lost something precious. Our connection to where we came from, what made us unique. Don't make that mistake, Mrs. Hayes. Your accent, your difference, it's not a weakness. It's a strength this country needs. After she left, Amelia and Daniel sat in stunned silence. The money would change everything. They could expand the ranch, hire more workers, build the life they'd dreamed of. But more than that, it felt like vindication, like the universe itself had taken their side. That evening, word came that changed things further. The Chinese workers from the railway, led by the man whose nephew Amelia had saved, had pooled their money to buy goods from the ranch. Not charity, they insisted through an interpreter, but fair trade. They wanted to buy vegetables from Amelia's garden for their camp, eggs from her chickens, milk from the cows. It would be a steady, reliable income. The Irish workers, not to be outdone, negotiated for beef purchases. Within a week, the ranch had contracts that would double their income, all from people the town had considered undesirable. It was Jake who put it best. Seems like all us outcasts are doing better together than we ever did trying to fit in with them. But the most profound moment came on a Sunday in late May. Amelia had been teaching the English class at church, helping new immigrants with basic phrases. The class had grown from 3 students to 30, a mix of Chinese, Irish, German, Mexican, and even a few French-Canadian trappers who'd settled in the area. She was teaching them the phrase, I am American, when little Greta Zimmerman, her legs still in a brace from the wagon accident, stood up. Mrs. Hayes is wrong, the child announced in her piping voice. The room went silent. Amelia felt her heart sink. Even the children still rejected her. But Greta continued, she shouldn't say, I am American. She should say, I am American with Polish music, because that's better. Like I'm American with German songs. And Li Wei is American with Chinese stories. Li Wei, the young man Amelia had saved, had been attending the classes despite speaking better English than half the town. He stood too. The little one is right. We don't become American by forgetting. We become American by adding. One by one, the students stood, declaring themselves American with Irish prayers, American with Mexican dances, American with Chinese wisdom. When they turned to Amelia expectantly, she stood, tears streaming. I am American with Polish soul. The applause started with her students, but spread to the observers, the townspeople who'd come to watch with skepticism, but found themselves moved by this redefinition of what it meant to belong. That night, there was a celebration at the ranch. Not a planned one, but something that grew organically. The Zimmermans arrived with German beer, the Martinezes with Mexican food, the Chinese workers with delicacies they'd been hiding, saving for special occasions. The Irish brought whiskey and songs. Even some townspeople came, the widow Harper, Doc Brennan, Judge Patterson, and surprisingly, Mrs. Morrison with a humble pie and a genuine smile. As the sun set, painting the prairie gold and crimson, the gathering moved outside. Someone had brought a fiddle, another a guitar. Music filled the air, not one tradition, but many, weaving together into something new, uniquely American. Daniel found Amelia standing at the edge of the celebration, watching it all with wonder. Penny for your thoughts. When I came here, she said slowly, I thought I had to choose. Be Polish or be American, keep accent or lose it. But look, She gestured to the mixed crowd, to the children playing together in multiple languages, to the adults sharing food and stories across cultures that had been enemies in the old world. We don't choose. We become both. All. You did this, Daniel said. Your courage, your refusal to hide or change, you showed them it was possible. No, Amelia corrected. We did this. You saw me not as foreign woman to save, but as person to love. You heard music where others heard mistake. Old Pete had been drinking with the Irish workers and stood up, swaying slightly. I got something to say, he announced. The crowd quieted. I've lived here 40 years. 40 years. And this? He gestured broadly, nearly losing his balance. This is the first time it felt like home. Real home. Not just place, but family. Weird, mixed-up, accent-filled family. Mrs. Chen, who'd been suspiciously sampling the German beer, stood too. Pete, right. We make new kind of family. Not blood family, but choice family. Better family. The celebration went late into the night. Stories were shared in multiple languages, often requiring creative translation. The Chinese workers taught everyone a simple dragon dance. The Irish led singing that had everyone joining in, even if they didn't know the words. Amelia sang a Polish lullaby that had mothers of every nationality wiping their eyes. At one point, Reverend Michaels arrived. The music stopped, conversations halted. He stood at the edge of the gathering, clearly uncomfortable but determined. I came to apologize, he said into the silence. I preached division when Christ preached unity. I spoke fear when he commanded love. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes, everyone, I was wrong. May I join you? It was Amelia who walked forward, who took his hand, who led him into the circle. All are welcome, she said simply. Is American way? Yes? As midnight approached and the gathering finally began to disperse, families loading sleeping children into wagons, promises were made to do this again. To make it regular. The celebration of many voices, someone dubbed it, and the name stuck. Daniel and Amelia stood on their porch, watching the lanterns of wagons disappear into the prairie darkness. Mrs. Chen had long since gone to bed, muttering happily about too much party, too much beer, very good night. You know what I love most about your accent? Daniel said suddenly. What? Amelia asked, leaning into his warmth. It reminds me that you chose to be here. Every word you speak in English is a choice, an effort, a bridge you've built between worlds. People who were born here, who never had to learn another language, who never had to leave everything behind, they don't have that. Their words are easy, automatic. Yours are deliberate, earned. Amelia turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the moonlight. Daniel Hayes, you make poet tonight. He laughed. Maybe you're rubbing off on me. Next thing you know, I'll be speaking Polish. I teach you, Amelia said immediately. Start simple. Kocham-cie. Kocham-cie? Daniel attempted, mangling it thoroughly. Amelia giggled. Means, I love you. You need practice. I love you too, Daniel said in clear English. In any language, with any accent. As they went inside, Amelia touched the jade pendant at her throat, thinking of all the protection it represented, not just the gift from the Chinese workers, but the entire network of outcasts and immigrants who'd become their shield against hatred. The next morning brought unexpected news. A letter arrived from the territorial governor, delivered by special messenger. Daniel read it aloud, his voice growing increasingly amazed. In recognition of exceptional service to the community, particularly in regards to the railway accident of May 15th, and for outstanding contributions to cultural harmony and education, Mrs. Amelia Hayes is hereby awarded the Territorial Medal of Merit. Amelia sank into a chair. His mistake? No mistake, the messenger said. The governor heard about what you did, not just at the accident, but after. The English classes, bringing the communities together. He said you represent the best of what Kansas can be, diverse, united, strong. The medal ceremony was held in Topeka a month later. Amelia wore a new dress, made from the fabric she'd chosen that day in the general store when Daniel had defended her. Daniel wore his best suit, looking proud enough to burst. Mrs. Chen came too, dressed in her finest Chinese silks, and Jake Martinez in his best vaquero outfit. But the real surprise was the crowd from Willow Ridge. 24 wagons had made the journey, the immigrant families, yes, but also many townspeople. Tom Bailey and his family, Doc Brennan, Judge Patterson, even Mrs. Morrison and Mrs. Appleby. Reverend Michaels had organized it, calling it a pilgrimage of redemption. When the governor pinned the medal on Amelia's dress, he said loud enough for all to hear, "Mrs. Hayes, your accent has been mentioned to me as something remarkable." I agree. It is remarkably brave. Every word you speak in English represents a journey most of us can't imagine. Kansas is lucky to have you. In her acceptance speech, Amelia spoke clearly. Her accent strong, but her words stronger. "When I come to America, I think I must lose my voice to find my place. But America, real America, does not ask us to lose. It asks us to add. I add my Polish songs to American dreams. Others add Chinese wisdom, Irish strength, German work, Mexican heart. Together, we make symphony. Not perfect, sometimes out of tune, but beautiful because it is real, because it is ours." The applause was thunderous. But for Amelia, the best moment came after, when Charles Whitmore's former secretary, a timid woman named Miss Garrett, approached her. "Mrs. Hayes," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Mr. Whitmore made me write those rejection letters to the other women, the ones Mrs. Sinclair mentioned. I felt guilty ever since. But you didn't let him win. You stayed and fought and showed us all what we were missing. Thank you for being braver than the rest of us." On the journey home, the wagons traveled together, a caravan of mixed voices singing songs in multiple languages. When they reached Willow Ridge, they found the town transformed. Banners reading, "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," hung across Main Street. The general store had a new sign in its window, "All languages welcome." But perhaps the most significant change was at the church. A new addition had been built, a community room specifically for the English classes and cultural exchanges. Above the door, a plaque read, "The Amelia Hayes Center for Learning and Unity." "I did not ask for this," Amelia said, overwhelmed. "You didn't have to," Reverend Michaels said. "You earned it by showing us that different doesn't mean divided. Your voice, the one we tried to silence, became the one that taught us how to listen." That evening, as Amelia and Daniel sat on their porch, the ranch quiet around them, she reflected on the journey from that terrible day at the train station to this moment of acceptance and even celebration. "You know what's funny?" she said. "Charles was right about one thing. My voice did change everything, just not the way he thought." Daniel pulled her closer. "Your voice made the world softer, just like I said that first day." "Our world," Amelia corrected. "It made our world softer." "No," Daniel disagreed gently. "Look at what happened. The town, the communities, the connections made. Your voice didn't just change our world. It changed the world around us, made it bigger, richer, more beautiful." As if in response, a mockingbird began its evening song from the cottonwood trees, cycling through its repertoire of borrowed calls, each one different, each one perfect in its imperfection, all of them together creating something uniquely beautiful. "Like us," Amelia said softly. "All different voices, making one song." "Like us," Daniel agreed. And in the gathering darkness, their own small piece of America seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of 100 different dreams, all of them valid, all of them valuable, all of them finally, truly home. The summer that followed was one of growth and consolidation. The ranch prospered with its new contracts, and Amelia's gardens expanded to meet demand. She hired 2 of the Chinese workers who'd been injured in the explosion and could no longer do heavy rail work. They brought knowledge of vegetables she'd never seen, and soon the ranch was producing ingredients that drew buyers from 3 counties away. The English classes grew too large for the church edition, so they split into multiple sessions. Amelia trained other teachers, including, surprisingly, Mrs. Morrison, who proved to have a gift for working with children. The woman who'd once led the charge against Amelia now spent her evenings teaching immigrant children their ABCs, often staying late to help with pronunciation. The harvest season arrived with unusual abundance that year, as if the prairie itself had decided to celebrate the changes in Willow Ridge. Amelia stood in her expanded garden, watching the Chinese workers she'd hired carefully harvesting the exotic vegetables they'd introduced, bok choy, daikon radishes, and other crops that would have seemed impossible in Kansas just months before. The morning sun caught the jade pendant at her throat, a daily reminder of how far they'd all come. Daniel found her there, as he often did these mornings, stealing a moment before the day's work consumed them both. "The buyers from Topeka arrived today," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "They want to see the operation, maybe establish a regular contract for the restaurants there." "Restaurants want our vegetables?" Amelia turned in his arms, surprised. "Polish Girl's Foreign Garden?" "The governor's medal winner's innovative agricultural enterprise," Daniel corrected with a grin. "Though I prefer to think of it as my brilliant wife's latest conquest." Before Amelia could respond, they heard wagons approaching. But it wasn't the buyers from Topeka. It was a familiar sight that had become weekly routine, families arriving for what the community had begun calling garden school. What had started as Amelia teaching a few immigrant women how to grow vegetables in Kansas soil had evolved into something much larger. Mrs. Zimmerman was first, helping little Greta down from their wagon. The child's leg had healed completely, and she ran to Amelia with the abandon of youth. "Mrs. Hayes, Mama says today you teach us about preserving, like your mother did in Poland?" "Yes, little one," Amelia said, catching the girl in a hug. "Old ways that work in new land." More wagons arrived, the Martinez family, several Irish railway workers' wives, and surprisingly, an elegant carriage that discharged none other than Mrs. Sinclair, Charles Whitmore's aunt, who had decided to extend her stay in Kansas indefinitely. "I'm too old to learn new tricks in Boston," she'd declared. "But here, everyone's learning something new. Makes me feel young again." The garden had become a classroom where old-world knowledge met new-world opportunities. Women who'd been isolated by language barriers and cultural differences worked side by side, sharing techniques passed down through generations. Mrs. Chen taught Chinese pickling methods. Mrs. Martinez demonstrated how to dry chilies. Mrs. O'Brien from the Irish camp showed them how to store potatoes through winter, and Amelia shared her mother's recipes for sauerkraut and preserved mushrooms. "Look at this," Mrs. Sinclair said, gesturing to the diverse group of women working together. "Charles spent his whole life trying to keep people in their proper places. And here you are, mixing everything together and creating something wonderful." "Not mixing," Amelia corrected gently, "weaving. Each thread stays itself but makes patterns stronger." It was Jake Martinez who interrupted the lesson, riding up fast with news. "Mrs. Hayes, the buyers from Topeka. They're in town, but there's a problem. They stopped at Bailey's store first, and some of the old crowd are filling their heads with stories." Daniel's jaw tightened. Though the town had largely changed, a core group remained hostile, mostly those who'd lost influence or money when the immigrant community created their own economic networks. They called themselves the True Americans, though Doc Brennan had taken to calling them the Truly Afraid. "What kind of stories?" Daniel asked. "That the vegetables are grown with foreign methods that might be unsafe, that the ranch employs questionable people, that dealing with us would damage their reputation in Topeka." Mrs. Sinclair stood, brushing dirt from her expensive skirts. "Gentlemen, I believe it's time I earned my keep around here. Jake, please inform the buyers that Margaret Sinclair of the Boston Sinclairs would like to invite them to lunch at Cottonwood Ranch. Tell them I'm considering investing in the operation and would value their opinion." The name Sinclair still carried weight, even in Kansas. The buyers, two well-dressed men who looked uncomfortable on the prairie, arrived within the hour, clearly curious about what a Boston society matron was doing at a ranch owned by the infamous foreign woman and her defender husband. But Mrs. Sinclair had orchestrated things perfectly. Lunch was served in the garden itself, under a canopy the women had erected. The table groaned under the weight of dishes representing every culture in the community: Polish pierogi, Chinese dumplings, Mexican tamales, Irish stew, German potato salad, and American cornbread. Each dish incorporated vegetables from the garden, their freshness and flavor undeniable. "Gentlemen," Mrs. Sinclair said, serving as hostess with natural authority, "you're tasting the future of American cuisine. Not one tradition dominating others, but all traditions contributing their best." The younger buyer, Mr. Harrison, took a bite of a Chinese dumpling filled with vegetables he'd never seen before. His eyes widened. This is extraordinary. The restaurants in Topeka would fight over ingredients this fresh and unique. But we heard, the older buyer, Mr. Carr, began hesitantly. You heard fear speaking, Mrs. Sinclair said bluntly. Fear of change, of difference, of losing control. But look around you. She gestured to the garden where women of 6 nationalities worked together, to the ranch hands, Mexican, Chinese, Irish, and American, loading wagons efficiently, to the children playing together in multiple languages. Does this look dangerous to you? Or does it look like prosperity? Amelia stood then, her medal of merit visible on her dress. Gentlemen, I show you something. She led them through the gardens, explaining how each section used different cultural techniques, Chinese raised beds for water conservation, Polish companion planting for pest control, Mexican Three Sisters method for corn, beans, and squash. We take best from each tradition, she explained, her accent clear but her expertise undeniable. Not to replace American ways, but to make them stronger. Like America itself, yes? Many peoples, one nation, stronger together. Mr. Harrison was sold. Mr. Carr took more convincing, until Daniel showed him the ledgers. The ranch's profits had tripled since implementing Amelia's diverse agricultural program. Numbers, it seemed, spoke louder than prejudice. We'll take everything you can supply, Mr. Harrison said finally. And I want exclusive rights to those Chinese vegetables. We'll make Topeka the culinary capital of Kansas. As the buyers left with a contract that would secure the ranch's prosperity for years, Amelia felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Lee Wei, the young man she'd saved at the railway accident. His English had improved dramatically through the classes at church. Mrs. Hayes, he said carefully, my uncle wants to speak with you. The elder, Mr. Chen, not related to your Mrs. Chen. He has proposal. The elder Mr. Chen had become the informal leader of the Chinese railway workers. When Amelia and Daniel met with him that evening, with Li Wei translating, his proposal was unexpected. We want to buy land, Mr. Chen said through his nephew. Not much. 20 acres near your ranch. Build small community. Grow vegetables like in China, but also learn American ways. You teach us. We share knowledge. Make both stronger. Daniel and Amelia exchanged glances. They had been considering what to do with the additional land they'd purchased using Mrs. Sinclair's settlement money. Why near us, so? Daniel asked. Li Wei translated his uncle's response. Because Mrs. Hayes sees us as people, not as strange foreigners. Because here, our children can learn without shame. Because together, we are safer than alone. The town won't like it, Amelia warned. The true Americans will make trouble. Mr. Chen smiled for the first time. Mrs. Hayes faced them alone and won. We face them together, we also win. The sale of the 20 acres to the Chinese community caused exactly the uproar expected. The true Americans, led by banker Josiah Whitmore, Charles's cousin who'd taken over the bank, organized a town meeting to protest. They claimed it would lower property values, attract undesirable elements, threaten the American way of life. The meeting was held in the church, packed to capacity. The true Americans had prepared speeches about racial purity, about the dangers of allowing celestials to establish permanent roots. But they hadn't counted on the alliance Amelia and Daniel had built. One by one, members of the community stood to speak in favor of the Chinese settlement. Doc Brennan talked about the Chinese medicines that had saved lives. Mrs. Morrison testified about the children in her classes, eager to learn and contribute. The Zimmermans spoke about fair trade and mutual respect. Even Reverend Michael's Transformation Complete quoted scripture about welcoming strangers. But it was Amelia who delivered the decisive argument. She stood, no longer the frightened woman who'd been rejected at the train station, and spoke in her accented English that had become a symbol of courage rather than shame. When I arrived here, Mr. Charles Whitmore rejected me for my accent. He said I would embarrass him, bring shame to town. Many of you agreed. You tried to drive me away with cruelty, with fire, with lies. She looked directly at Josiah Whitmore. But I stayed. I worked. I contributed. And now this town prospers because of what you tried to reject. She pulled out a ledger. The Chinese workers, the Irish, the Mexicans, they buy from our stores now. They pay taxes. Their children attend our schools. The restaurant contracts from Topeka come because we offer what no other town does: diversity, innovation, cooperation. You want to protect American way of life? This is American way. E pluribus unum. From many, want some. The vote wasn't close. The Chinese community was welcomed by a margin of 3-1. Josiah Whitmore left in disgust, muttering about finding a more American town. Few mourned his departure. The Chinese settlement grew quickly but carefully, neat houses with gardens that seemed to produce miracles. They established a small temple that also served as a school where children learned Chinese in the morning and attended regular school in the afternoon. The integration wasn't without friction, but each conflict resolved peacefully strengthened the bonds between communities. As autumn deepened into winter, Amelia noticed changes in herself. She was tired more easily. Certain smells made her nauseous. Mrs. Chen noticed first, her wise eyes twinkling. "You have glow," she said one morning as Amelia struggled with breakfast. Baby glow. The confirmation from Doc Brennan sent Daniel into a mixture of joy and panic. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We're having a baby." "Actually," Doc Brennan said after a more thorough examination, "I believe it might be babies. Twins run in families, and I'm hearing 2 heartbeats." Amelia sat stunned. 2 children, growing within her, American children who would carry Polish blood, who would speak both languages from birth, who would never know a world where accents meant exclusion. The news spread quickly, as news always did in Willow Ridge. But now, instead of gossip and condemnation, gifts began arriving. Baby clothes from Mrs. Morrison's sewing circle, hand-carved toys from the German woodworkers, beautiful silk blankets from the Chinese community, a cradle built by the Mexican craftsman. "Look," Daniel said one evening, surveying the growing pile of gifts. "Our children will be wrapped in the love of a dozen cultures before they're even born." Winter came hard that year, blizzards that isolated the ranch for days at a time. But Amelia had never felt less alone. The house was constantly full, Mrs. Chen fussing over her nutrition, neighboring women visiting with advice and remedies, Daniel barely leaving her side except for essential work. It was during one of these blizzards that unexpected visitors arrived. A wagon struggled through the snow, and from it emerged 3 women, the Irish woman, the Italian, and the Southern widow that Charles Whitmore had previously rejected. Mrs. Sinclair had tracked them down and invited them to visit, to see what had become of the town that had rejected them. "We had to come," the Irish woman, Bridget O'Sullivan, said, her brogue thick with emotion, "to see if it was true that someone finally stood up to him and won." The Italian woman, Isabella Romano, took Amelia's hands. "You did what we couldn't." "You stayed and fought." The Southern widow, Charlotte Beaumont, added softly, "You made them hear your accent as music instead of mistake." "How?" Amelia looked at these women who had traveled so far to find hope, who had been broken by the same man who'd tried to break her. "I did not do it alone," she said. "I found someone who heard music from beginning." She looked at Daniel. "And then others who were also different, also rejected. Together, we became stronger than their fear." Over the next days, the 3 women were embraced by the community. Bridget decided to stay, opening a bakery that specialized in Irish breads. Isabella returned to Chicago, but with plans to establish a trade route for Italian goods. Charlotte went back to Georgia, but as an ambassador, spreading word of a Kansas town where different was welcomed. Spring arrived with Amelia heavily pregnant, moving slowly but still teaching, still working in the gardens. The celebration of many voices had become a monthly event, drawing visitors from neighboring towns who came to see the miracle of Willow Ridge, a frontier town where diversity meant strength. It was during April's celebration that Amelia's labor began. The music stopped as she gasped, gripping Daniel's arm. Doc Brennan was there immediately, but so were the midwives from every community: Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Martinez, Mrs. O'Brien, Mrs. Zimmerman. They descended upon the ranch house with the efficiency of an army. "Too many cooks," Doc Brennan protested. "Doctor delivers babies," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Women deliver mothers. You need us all." For 15 hours, Amelia labored. The house filled with whispered prayers in a dozen languages. Daniel paced the porch, Jake and old Pete keeping him company. The entire community seemed to hold its breath. Then, as dawn broke on a perfect spring morning, the first cry rang out. Then, minutes later, a second. 2 boys, Doc Brennan announced, exhausted but smiling, healthy, loud, and perfect. Daniel was allowed in to find Amelia holding both babies, tears streaming down her face. "Listen," she whispered. The babies were making soft sounds, not quite cries, not quite coos. "They sing," Amelia said. "Already they make their own music." They named them Thomas and Stanislaw, American and Polish names, representing both worlds. Thomas had Daniel's gray eyes and strong chin, while Stanislaw had Amelia's dark hair and delicate features. The baptism was held a month later, not in the church but by the creek under the cottonwood trees where Daniel had first told Amelia he loved her accent. Reverend Michaels performed the ceremony, but blessings were offered in every language represented in the community. The Chinese offered red envelopes for luck. The Irish sang blessings. The Mexicans performed a traditional dance. The Germans presented hand-carved crosses. "These children," Reverend Michaels said, "are born not of one tradition, but of many. They will grow up hearing Polish lullabies and American folk songs, eating Chinese dumplings and German sausage, learning that difference is not division, but richness." As if in response, both babies began to babble, soft musical sounds that seemed to encompass every accent they'd been hearing since birth. The years that followed saw Willow Ridge transform from a small frontier town to a destination. The territorial governor made it a model for integration, bringing delegations to see how former enemies had become neighbors. The railway extended a permanent station, recognizing the economic benefit of the diverse community. The school expanded, offering instruction in multiple languages alongside English. Amelia's English improved, but never lost its Polish music. She could have worked to eliminate her accent entirely. Doc Brennan offered to help with pronunciation exercises, but she refused. "My accent tells story," she explained to her growing sons when they asked why Mama spoke differently than some others. "It says I'm brave enough to learn new language, strong enough to keep old one. It says I choose to be here, choose America, choose you." The boys grew up bilingual, switching effortlessly between languages, their voices carrying traces of every accent they heard. They played with children from every community, learned recipes from every tradition, heard stories from every culture. One day when the boys were 5, a new family arrived in town. Russians fleeing persecution. They stood at the train station, frightened and uncertain, the woman clutching her children, the man trying to look strong despite his obvious fear. Their English was broken, their accents thick. It was Thomas who broke free from Amelia's hand and ran to them. In careful Russian that Mrs. Chen's friend had taught him, he said, "Welcome. Don't be scared. Mama had accent too. Now she's hero." The Russian woman looked at Amelia, recognition dawning. "You are Metal Woman? Polish woman who saved Chinese workers?" "I am Amelia Hayes," she replied, "and this is your home now, if you want. Here, accents are music, and different is beautiful." As she helped the Russian family gather their belongings, as she had once gathered her own single suitcase, Amelia thought about the journey from rejection to acceptance, from isolation to community. Charles Whitmore had been wrong. Her accent hadn't brought shame. It had brought understanding, connection, and ultimately transformation. That evening, as the ranch settled into sleep, Amelia stood on the porch where she'd stood so many times before. The cottonwood trees whispered in the breeze, their leaves creating a symphony of soft sounds. From the house, she could hear Daniel singing the boys to sleep, an American lullaby with words she'd taught him in Polish. Mrs. Chen emerged from the kitchen, older now, but still strong. "You thinking about past?" "And future," Amelia replied. "When I arrived, I thought I had to become American by stopping being Polish. But America asked for more. It asked me to be both, to add my voice to its chorus." "America lucky to have your voice," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "We all lucky." From the Chinese settlement came the sound of evening prayers, mixing with Mexican guitars from the Martinez Ranch, Irish fiddles from the railway camp, and somewhere a German accordion playing a waltz. The sounds shouldn't have harmonized, but somehow they did, creating something unique to this place, this moment, this frontier where rejection had transformed into celebration. "You know what Daniel told me?" Amelia said softly. "He said my voice made the world softer, but I think maybe the world was always soft. It just needed someone to show it how to listen." As if in agreement, a mockingbird began its evening song, borrowing from every sound it had heard, creating a melody that was both imitation and innovation, both foreign and familiar, both different and perfectly, beautifully American. The story of Amelia Hayes spread beyond Kansas, carried by travelers and traders, written about in Eastern newspapers as a curiosity and then as inspiration. Letters arrived from immigrant women across the country, thanking her for showing them that their accents weren't flaws to hide, but stories to share. Years later, when Thomas and Stanislaw were grown with children of their own, when Willow Ridge had become a small city known for its cultural festivals and innovative agriculture, when the ranch had expanded into an agricultural college teaching fusion farming techniques, a historian came to interview Amelia about those early days. "Mrs. Hayes," the young woman asked, "what would you tell someone arriving in America today, someone worried their accent makes them less American?" Amelia, her hair now silver, but her voice still carrying its Polish music, smiled. "I would tell them that America is not about sounding same, but about singing together. Each accent is note in America's song. Without all notes, song is incomplete. And to those who would reject them for their accent, I would say what I learned, that those who mock accent of courage have never been brave enough to learn second language, have never been strong enough to cross ocean for dream, have never been generous enough to add their voice to chorus instead of demanding solo." The historian wrote it all down, but what she couldn't capture was the sound of Amelia's voice itself. Still accented after all these years, still musical, still carrying the echo of a girl who'd stood on a train platform with a single suitcase and the dream of belonging, who'd been rejected for her voice and had used that same voice to transform a town, a community, a small piece of America itself. That night, at the monthly celebration of many voices, now attended by hundreds, featuring foods and music from dozens of cultures, Amelia stood to speak. She was introduced as a pioneer, a medal recipient, an educator, a transformer of communities. But when she spoke, she introduced herself differently. "I am Amelia Kowalski Hayes," she said, her accent as clear as it had been that first day. Polish teacher who became American farmer, foreign woman who became Kansas mother, rejected bride who became beloved wife. "I speak with accent that tells my story, where I from, where I going, who I choose to be. This accent, once called ugly, now I know is beautiful, because it is bridge between worlds, proof of journey, sound of courage." The applause was thunderous, but beneath it, if you listened carefully, you could hear something else. The sound of dozens of accents joining together, each different, each valuable, each adding its unique note to the American symphony. It was the sound Charles Whitmore had feared, the sound the true Americans had tried to silence, the sound of America's promise fulfilled. The morning after the celebration, Amelia woke to find Daniel already up, standing by the window of their bedroom, watching the sun rise over the prairie. 20 years had passed since she'd first arrived in Willow Ridge, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, his dark hair now streaked with silver, but his love for her had only grown stronger, like the cottonwood trees his father had planted against all odds. "Can't sleep?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Just thinking," he said, covering her hands with his. "The railroad company wants to name the new express route through here the Harmony Line, because of what we've built. They say cities back east are studying how Willow Ridge became what it is." "And what is it?" Amelia asked, though she knew the answer. "Proof," Daniel said simply. "Proof that different voices can create harmony instead of discord, that acceptance creates prosperity, that love is stronger than fear." A knock at their door interrupted them. It was Stanislaw, now 20, his face troubled. "Mama, Papa, there's someone at the door." "A woman. She looks like she's been traveling hard. She's asking for you, Mama, speaking Polish." Amelia's heart quickened. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find a young woman, perhaps 25, standing in their parlor. Her clothes were worn but clean, her hands clutched a small suitcase, and her eyes were achingly familiar. "Kiotia Amelia," the woman said in Polish. Aunt Emilia? I am Katarzyna, your brother's daughter. Emilia gasped, sinking into a chair. Her brother Pavel, she'd thought he'd died in the Troubles, along with everyone else from their village. Pavel's daughter? But how? He survived, Katarzyna said, switching to heavily accented English for Daniel's benefit. The Prussians took him for their army, but he escaped to Russia. He married there, had me. Before he died last year, he told me about you. How you went to America, how you wrote letters that stopped coming. He saved everyone. She pulled out a packet of letters, yellowed with age. Emilia recognized her own handwriting, letters sent in those first hopeful months before the silence from home became deafening. He wanted to write back, Katarzyna continued, tears streaming down her face. But he was afraid the authorities would track him through the letters. He lived in hiding for years. But he never forgot you. He taught me English, told me if anything happened to him, I should find you. Emilia embraced her niece, both women crying. Daniel quietly ushered Thomas and Stanislaw out, giving them privacy, but Katarzyna called them back. No, please. I want to know family, all family. She looked around the room, taking in the photographs on the walls, the ranch family through the years, all the different faces and cultures represented. The stories Papa told, he said Aunt Emilia was teacher, proper lady. But this, she gestured at the evidence of a life fully lived, this is more. Your aunt, Daniel said proudly, is the woman who transformed this town, who showed us that accents are music, that different is beautiful, that courage speaks in any language. Katarzyna's eyes widened. The medal? Papa heard rumors, stories traveling even to Russia about Polish woman in Kansas who won American medal, who made town for all people. We didn't know it was you. He would have been so proud. Over the following days, Katarzyna shared her own story. She'd been working as a seamstress in Moscow, saving kopecks for years to afford passage to America. She'd arrived in New York with nothing but hope and her father's stories. They almost didn't let me in, she admitted. My English, it is not good. They said I might become burden, but I told them about you, about the medal. The immigration officer, he knew the story. He said, if you're half the woman your aunt is, America needs you. Emilia took Katarzyna to the next community meeting, introducing her to the town that had become a beacon for immigrants across the country. The young woman was overwhelmed by the warmth of the reception, by the number of languages being spoken openly, by the ease with which people moved between cultures. In Russia, Katarzyna said wonderingly, we hid our Polish words, our Polish songs. Here, you celebrate them? Here, Mrs. Chen said, now ancient but still sharp, we know that hiding makes us weak. Sharing makes us strong. Katarzyna had brought more than just family connection. She'd brought skills in traditional Polish embroidery and lace-making that had been lost to Emilia's generation. Soon she was teaching classes, adding another thread to Willow Ridge's cultural tapestry. Her work caught the attention of fashion houses in Chicago and New York, creating another economic stream for the community. But change was coming to Willow Ridge in larger ways. The territory was preparing for statehood, and there were debates about what kind of state Kansas would be. Would it embrace the diversity that towns like Willow Ridge represented, or would it follow the path of exclusion that many were advocating? A delegation from the territorial capital arrived to observe Willow Ridge to see if the stories were true. They were men in dark suits with skeptical expressions, led by a senator named Hartley who'd made his reputation on keeping Kansas purely American. Mrs. Hayes, Senator Hartley said at the town meeting, his tone condescending, while your experiment here is interesting, surely you must see it's not sustainable on a larger scale. A few dozen immigrants in one town is one thing, but imagine if every town became prosperous. Emilia interrupted, standing to face him. Imagine if every town had our agricultural innovation, our cultural exchanges, our economic growth. Senator, we have statistics. She nodded to Thomas, who'd become the town's unofficial record keeper. Thomas stood consulting his ledgers. Willow Ridge has grown 400% in 20 years. Our per capita income is double the territorial average. Our school produces students who speak multiple languages and go on to universities back east. Our agricultural methods have increased yield by 300%. Crime is nearly non-existent because everyone has investment in community success. But at what cost? Hartley persisted. You've diluted American culture. We've enriched it, Stanislaw interjected. He'd inherited his mother's linguistic gifts and his father's fierce loyalty. Senator, what is American culture? Is it not the ability to take the best from everywhere and make something new? Is that not what the founders did, taking ideas from Greece, Rome, Britain, France, and creating something unique? The delegation stayed for 3 days, observing, interviewing, investigating. They saw the Chinese settlement, now a thriving community with the best schools in the territory. They visited the Mexican ranches, where innovative cattle breeding was creating hardier stock. They attended the Irish Catholic Church and the German Lutheran service, both thriving alongside the original Protestant congregation. On their last evening, the town held one of its celebrations of many voices. Senator Hartley sat stiffly as dishes from dozens of cultures were served, as children performed traditional dances from their parents' homelands, as music filled the air in languages he didn't understand. Then Amelia's granddaughter, little Anna, Thomas's daughter, climbed onto the makeshift stage. She was 5 years old, with her grandmother's dark hair and her grandfather's gray eyes. In a clear, sweet voice, she began to sing America the Beautiful, but each verse was in a different language. English, Polish, Chinese, Spanish, German, rotating through all the tongues she'd been learning since birth. When she finished, the silence was profound. Then Senator Hartley, the man who'd built his career on exclusion, stood and applauded. I came here, he said slowly, believing that America needed protection from foreign influence. But that child, that American child, just showed me that foreign influence, welcomed and integrated, doesn't weaken America. It makes it more beautiful. The senator's conversion wasn't complete or immediate, but it was genuine enough that when statehood came, Kansas's constitution included protections for immigrant communities that were radical for the time. Willow Ridge was cited in the debates, Amelia's story told and retold as proof that America's strength lay not in its uniformity, but in its diversity. But perhaps the most profound change came from an unexpected source. Josiah Whitmore, Charles's cousin who'd left in disgust years earlier, returned to Willow Ridge. He was older, humbled, his business ventures in other towns having failed. He appeared at the ranch on a cold December morning, hat in hand. Daniel's first instinct was to send him away, but Amelia stopped him. Mr. Whitmore, she said, you have something to say? I came to apologize, Josiah said, the words clearly difficult, and to ask for work. Daniel laughed bitterly. Work? From us? I know I don't deserve consideration, Josiah continued, but I've learned something in my years away. Every town I went to, looking for that pure American community I thought I wanted, they all failed. No innovation, no growth, no life. Just the same people thinking the same thoughts, fearing the same changes. They're dying, those towns. But Willow Ridge lives, grows, thrives. Because of people you tried to drive out, Amelia reminded him. Yes, Josiah admitted. Because I was a fool who confused different with dangerous, who thought accent meant less than. I was wrong. I'm asking, begging, for a chance to prove I've changed. It was Katarzyna who spoke up. In Russia, we have saying, the same hammer that breaks glass forges steel. Maybe Mr. Whitmore has been forged? After much debate, they gave him work. Menial labor at first, cleaning stables and mending fences. But Josiah worked without complaint, slowly earning, if not trust, then at least tolerance. When he used his banking knowledge to help the Chinese community establish a credit union, when he stood up at a town meeting to defend immigration, people began to believe his transformation might be real. Years flowed like the creek beneath the cottonwoods. Thomas married the daughter of Irish railway workers, their wedding a fusion of American, Polish, and Irish traditions. Stanislaw went east to study law, returning with a degree and a passion for defending immigrant rights. Katarzyna married Li Wei, the young man Amelia had saved so many years ago, their union bridging cultures in ways that would have been unimaginable when Amelia first arrived. Mrs. Chen passed peacefully in her sleep one spring morning, but not before seeing the opening of the Chen Hayes Cultural Center, a building dedicated to preserving and sharing the traditions of all Willow Ridge's communities. Daniel and Amelia spoke at the dedication, their hair white now, but their love still evident in every glance. "This building," Daniel said, "stands as testament to a simple truth my wife taught us, that voices different from our own aren't threats to be silenced, but gifts to be treasured." Amelia stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, hundreds of faces representing dozens of nationalities, all American, all home. "When I came here," she said, her accent still present, still musical, "a man rejected me for how I speak. He said my voice would bring shame. Today, my granddaughter learns in schools where many languages are heard. My sons defend rights of immigrants in courts of law. My niece's art hangs in galleries from Chicago to New York. My husband's ranch feeds half of Kansas with methods learned from around the world. If this is shame, then I wear it proudly." The crowd erupted in applause, but Amelia wasn't finished. "I want to speak to those who still come, frightened, rejected, mocked for your accent, your difference. You are not less than. You are not burden. You are gift America doesn't yet know it needs. Your voice, however it sounds, makes America's song richer. Don't let anyone silence it." After the ceremony, a young woman approached Amelia, another mail-order bride, this one from Romania, recently rejected by her intended husband in a neighboring town for her accent. She'd heard about Amelia and come seeking advice. "What do I do?" the woman asked desperately. "Where do I go?" Amelia took her hands. "You stay here," she said firmly. "Willow Ridge has room for another voice. We'll find you work, teach you what you need, and maybe—" She glanced at her grandson James, Thomas's boy, who'd been casting interested glances at the Romanian woman. "Maybe you'll find more than just survival here." That evening, as had become tradition, the family gathered under the cottonwood trees. 4 generations now, Amelia and Daniel, their sons and their wives, grandchildren ranging from Anna's sweet 5 to James's sturdy 22, and newest addition, Stanislaus' infant daughter, sleeping in her mother's arms. "Tell us the story, Babcia," Anna requested, using the Polish word for grandmother she'd learned before she could properly walk. "Tell us about when you came to America." So Amelia told it again, the story these children knew by heart but never tired of hearing, about the train platform and Charles Whitmore's cruel rejection, about the barn burning and the community rebuilding, about the Chinese workers and the railway accident, about voices raised in harmony despite different languages. "But why didn't you change your voice, Babcia?" Anna asked, though she knew the answer. "You could have learned to speak like everyone else." "Because my voice tells truth," Amelia said, pulling the child close. "It says I was brave enough to cross ocean, strong enough to learn new language, generous enough to keep old one. It says I choose to be here, choose America, choose all of you. Every word I speak with accent is bridge between worlds." Daniel, still her anchor after all these years, added, "Your grandmother's voice did something more than that. It made our world softer. Every accented word reminded us that there are different ways to say love, different ways to express hope, different ways to build community. Without her voice, exactly as it is, Willow Ridge would still be a small, frightened town instead of what it's become." As if to emphasize his point, the evening air filled with the sounds of the modern Willow Ridge, a Mexican guitar from one yard, Chinese children playing in another, Irish fiddle music from the community center, and somewhere the call to prayer from the small mosque the Turkish immigrants had recently built. The sounds shouldn't have harmonized, but they did, creating something uniquely American, uniquely beautiful. Later, after the children had been put to bed, after the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Amelia and Daniel sat alone on their porch, as they'd done thousands of nights before. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, but it no longer seemed empty or hostile. It seemed full of possibility, of voices yet to arrive, stories yet to be told. "Do you ever regret it, Mo?" Daniel asked suddenly. "Coming here? That day at the station, you could have taken Charles's money and gone back. Found somewhere easier." Amelia was quiet for a moment, considering. "If I had left, I never would have heard you say my voice made world softer. Never would have seen Thomas defend immigrant family in court. never would have heard Anna sing America in 7 languages, never would have known that rejected Polish teacher could help build something like this. She gestured to the thriving community around them. So, no regret? Daniel pressed. Only one, Amelia said, and Daniel looked concerned until she smiled. I regret it took so long for me to understand that my accent wasn't burden to overcome, but gift to share. A sound made them both look up, a wagon approaching in the darkness. As it drew closer, they could see it was full of people, a family by the looks of it. The man driving called out in accented English, "Please, is this Willow Ridge?" We looked for Mrs. Hayes, Mrs. Amelia Hayes. Daniel and Amelia walked to meet them. In the wagon were 6 people, a couple, probably in their 30s, with 4 children ranging from infant to adolescent. Their clothes suggested Eastern European origin. Their exhausted faces told of a long, difficult journey. "I am Amelia Hayes," she said gently. "How can I help?" The woman burst into tears. "They said you would help." "In New York, at immigration, when they almost sent us back because of our English. Someone there, a man named James, he said his grandmother was Amelia Hayes from Willow Ridge, said if we could get here, you would help us." Amelia smiled, recognizing her grandson's intervention. James had gone to New York to study international law, inspired by his grandmother's story. Apparently, he was already putting his education to use. "What are your names?" Amelia asked. "I am Mikhail," the man said. "This is my wife, Anya." "We are from Ukraine. We are Jews. In our country, it is becoming dangerous. We sold everything to come here, but—" His voice broke. "My English, it is not good. They say we cannot succeed here, that we should go back." "They are wrong," Amelia said firmly. She turned to Daniel, who was already nodding. "Tonight, you stay with us. Tomorrow, we find you home, work, place and community. Your English will improve, but your accent is not shame. It is proof of courage." As they helped the family from the wagon, as they carried sleeping children into the house, as they prepared beds and heated soup, Amelia thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. Charles Whitmore's rejection had sparked a transformation that now reached across continents, creating a network of hope for those who arrived with nothing but dreams and determination. The next morning, the community mobilized as it always did for new arrivals. The Zimmermans offered temporary housing in their expanded farmhouse. The Chinese credit union provided a small loan for essentials. The Irish church ladies arrived with clothes for the children. The Mexican ranchers offered work for Mikhail. The school prepared to welcome the children with its proven program for non-English speakers. At the impromptu welcome gathering, Anya approached Amelia with tears in her eyes. "Why?" she asked. "Why you help strangers?" "Because someone helped me when I was stranger," Amelia replied. "Because difference makes us stronger. Because your voice, however it sounds, adds to American song." She paused, then added something she'd learned over the years. "And because helping you helps us. Your traditions, your knowledge, your perspectives, they will make Willow Ridge better, just as every wave of newcomers has." Sure enough, within months, the Ukrainian family had established themselves as valuable members of the community. Mikhail's knowledge of advanced farming techniques from the Ukrainian steppes improved grain yields. Anya's skill with natural dyeing created a new artistic industry. Their children excelled in school, adding Ukrainian to the linguistic symphony of the playground. One day a letter arrived from the president himself, inviting Amelia to Washington to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award for her contributions to American immigration integration. The entire town wanted to accompany her, but she insisted on taking only Daniel, her sons, and her grandchildren. In the Grand Hall in Washington, surrounded by dignitaries and officials, Amelia stood at the podium in her best dress, one that Katarzyna had embroidered with motifs from every culture in Willow Ridge. The president introduced her as a pioneer, a hero, a transformer of communities. When it was her turn to speak, Amelia looked out at the assembled crowd. Politicians, journalists, immigrant advocates, and skeptics alike. She spoke clearly, her accent still present after all these years in America. "Mr. President, distinguished guests," she began, "I stand before you as immigrant woman who was rejected on train platform for how I speak. That rejection could have broken me. Instead, it became beginning of understanding that America is not about becoming same, but about contributing difference. She continued, her voice growing stronger. Every immigrant who comes to these shores brings gift, new way of seeing, new way of solving problems, new way of enriching American culture. But too often, we demand they wrap that gift in American paper, speak it with American accent, present it in an American way, or we refuse it entirely. We lose so much richness this way. She pulled out a small object, the jade pendant the Chinese workers had given her so many years ago. This was given to me by a Chinese immigrant whose life I saved. But truth is, he saved mine too. He and others showed me that my difference wasn't weakness, but strength. That my accent wasn't flaw, but feature. That my Polish songs didn't diminish American anthem, but harmonized with it. The room was silent, captivated. Today, Willow Ridge stands as proof that diversity creates prosperity, that acceptance creates strength, that love is more powerful than fear. We did not achieve this by erasing differences, but by celebrating them, not by silencing accents, but by listening to them as music. She looked directly at the section where she knew journalists were seated. To those who fear immigration, who worry about American identity, I say this. American identity is not a fragile thing that breaks with exposure to difference. It is robust, adaptable, made stronger by every new thread woven into its fabric. The question is not whether immigrants change America. Of course we do. The question is whether we allow that change to make America bigger, richer, more beautiful, or whether we let fear make us smaller. The applause was thunderous, but Amelia raised her hand for silence. I want to end with challenge. In every town, every city, there are people being rejected for their accents, their differences. There are mail-order brides dismissed at train stations, workers denied jobs despite qualifications, children mocked in schools for how their parents speak. Find them, help them. Listen to their voices not as threats, but as gifts. Make your world softer with their music. After the ceremony, as the family toured Washington, young Anna tugged on Amelia's dress. Babcia, are you famous now? Amelia knelt down to her granddaughter's level. No, little one. The idea is famous, that every voice matters, that every accent carries story worth hearing. I am just woman who learned this truth and shared it. Will people remember? Anna asked. Some will, Amelia said, but more important is that they act. That when they hear accent, they hear courage. When they see difference, they see opportunity. When they meet stranger, they see future neighbor. The return to Willow Ridge was triumphant. The entire town had gathered at the train station, the same platform where Amelia had been rejected decades earlier. As she stepped off the train, she saw the banner, "Welcome home to the voice that made our world softer." But more than the banner, she saw the faces, hundreds of them, representing dozens of countries, all American, all home. She saw former enemies, now friends, former rejectors, now advocates, former strangers, now family. That evening, at the largest celebration of many voices ever held, Amelia was asked to give a toast. She raised her glass, filled with Polish vodka that someone had specially imported for the occasion, and said simply, "To America. Not perfect country, but perfectible one. To voices, all voices, that make it so. And to accent that brought me here, that kept me here, that made here home." As glasses clinked and voices rose in a dozen languages saying cheers, a young woman approached Amelia. She was perhaps 20, with the uncertain look of recent arrival. "Mrs. Hayes," she said in heavily accented English, Russian perhaps, or Bulgarian, "I just arrived yesterday. They say you help people like me, people with accent." Amelia took the young woman's hands in her weathered ones. "Tell me your name." "Svetlana," the woman said. "I come to marry an American man, but when he hear my voice—" She trailed off, the story painfully familiar. "Svetlana," Amelia said firmly, "you have come to right place. Here, your accent is not problem to fix, but story to share. Here, you will find work, purpose, family, and maybe—" She glanced across the crowd where she saw one of the younger ranchers watching with interest. "Maybe you find love with someone who hears music in your voice." As she introduced Svetlana to the community, as she watched the young woman's fear transform to hope, Amelia thought about the cycle continuing. Every rejection could become acceptance. Every accent could become music. Every stranger could become family. It just took courage to speak, wisdom to listen, and love to bridge the differences. The party continued late into the night, voices raised in song, in laughter, in conversation. Children ran between the adults, switching languages as easily as they switched games. The elderly sat together, sharing stories of the places they'd left and the home they'd built. Young couples danced to music that blended traditions, creating something new with every step. Daniel found Amelia standing apart for a moment, watching it all with tears in her eyes. "Happy tears?" he asked, wrapping his arm around her. "Grateful tears," she corrected. "Look what grew from one rejection. Look what bloomed from one man saying my voice was shameful." "Your voice was never shameful," Daniel said. "It was revolutionary. It changed everything." "No," Amelia said thoughtfully. "Love changed everything. Love that heard music where others heard mistake. Love that saw beauty where others saw difference. Love that built bridges where others built walls."